In 285 AD, the Roman Empire faced structural and administrative challenges that threatened its ability to govern effectively. Its territory extended from Britain in the northwest to Egypt in the southeast, and from the Iberian Peninsula to the Euphrates River, creating logistical and defensive difficulties. In response, Emperor Diocletian introduced the Tetrarchy, a system dividing imperial authority among 4 rulers. Diocletian assumed control of the eastern provinces as Augustus, based in Nicomedia, while Maximian took the western provinces, ruling from Milan. Each Augustus appointed a subordinate Caesar to assist in governance and succession. Galerius under Diocletian in the east and Constantius Chlorus under Maximian in the west. The Tetrarchy aimed to provide rapid responses to military threats, streamline administration, and create a structured succession mechanism. The administrative division established a distinction between the Eastern and Western Roman empires. The East encompassed provinces with concentrated urban centers, fertile agricultural lands, and established trade routes, including Anatolia, Egypt, and the Levant. The West, in contrast, faced greater pressure from migrating Germanic groups and relied on military intervention to maintain stability. Diocletian also reorganized provinces into smaller units, grouped into dioceses overseen by vicars reporting to the Augusti. Military command was structured with frontier armies, the Limitanii, stationed along borders, and mobile field armies, the comitatenses, to respond to internal or external threats. Civil and military authority were separated to reduce the risk of provincial governors challenging imperial power. Economic measures were implemented to support this administrative and military framework. The eastern provinces contributed significant tax revenue, supporting army maintenance, infrastructure projects, and urban administration. Diocletian attempted economic stabilization through measures such as the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 AD to control inflation, though this measure had a limited practical effect. The East benefited from access to Mediterranean and Red Sea trade routes, large urban markets, and agricultural productivity, which strengthened the empire's fiscal and logistical capacity. Religiously, the empire remained officially pagan, but Christian communities were increasing in urban centers. In 303 AD, Diocletian initiated a systematic persecution of Christians, focusing on clergy, confiscation of property, and suppression of Christian practices, aiming to maintain traditional religious unity in the empire. Despite these measures, Christianity continued to expand in both numbers and influence, particularly in cities and along trade networks. Following Diocletian's retirement in 305 AD, the Tetrarchy began to experience instability due to rivalries among the Augusti and Caesars. Ambition and dynastic claims led to civil conflicts, with various claimants competing for supremacy. Constantine, son of Constantius Chlorus, was proclaimed Augustus by his troops in 306 AD after his father's death, challenging the existing hierarchy. Through a combination of military campaigns and political alliances, Constantine consolidated power. He defeated Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, securing control of the western provinces. By 324 AD, Constantine defeated Licinius, the Eastern Augustus, uniting the empire under his sole authority. This consolidation established a stable power base in the eastern provinces. The East, with its wealth, urban infrastructure, and defensible geography, became the foundation for a distinct imperial identity. The administrative reforms of Diocletian and the centralization achieved under Constantine ensured continuity in governance, law, and military organization. These developments created the conditions for the survival and evolution of the Eastern Roman Empire in the Eastern Mediterranean over the following centuries. After consolidating control over the Roman Empire in 324 AD, Constantine I undertook a series of administrative and strategic reforms, including the founding of a new imperial capital. He selected the site of Byzantium, an established city located on the Bosporus Strait, as the location for this capital. The city's position was strategically significant, controlling the passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, facilitating trade and military mobility, and providing natural defensive advantages. Construction of the city, which Constantine named Constantinople, began in 324 AD and continued over several years, incorporating both existing structures and new monumental buildings designed to serve administrative, religious, and military functions. Constantinople was designed to serve as a political and administrative center capable of supporting a large bureaucracy. Key structures included imperial palaces, government offices, public forums, and fortifications. Constantine also established aqueducts, cisterns, and other infrastructure to supply water and support urban population growth. The city was intended to be a center of imperial authority, concentrating administrative, military, and economic functions in a location that could withstand external threats more effectively than Rome or other Western cities. Economically, Constantinople's location allowed it to control major trade routes connecting Europe and Asia. Its proximity to the grain-producing regions of Egypt and the Levant, combined with access to maritime trade through the Mediterranean and Black Sea, provided the city with significant resources. These advantages supported both the urban population and the military station to defend the capital and the surrounding regions. Constantine encouraged settlement by moving populations from other parts of the empire, including veterans and administrators, to strengthen the city's economic and demographic base. Religious policy in the new capital reflected Constantine's own support for Christianity, which he had begun to promote following his victory at the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD. Churches were established, and Christian leaders were granted positions of influence in both civic and imperial matters. However, the city retained elements of traditional Roman administrative and legal practices, ensuring continuity with earlier imperial structures while introducing a center for the emerging Christian culture of the empire. By 330 AD, Constantinople was officially inaugurated as the new capital of the Roman Empire. The city quickly assumed the functions of a political and administrative center, replacing Rome in importance for imperial governance. The establishment of Constantinople marked a decisive shift in the orientation of the empire, emphasizing the eastern provinces as the center of imperial authority. Its foundation laid the groundwork for the development of the Eastern Roman Empire as a distinct and enduring political and cultural entity in the Eastern Mediterranean. Following the establishment of Constantinople as the imperial capital in 330 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire underwent a significant religious transformation. Christianity, which had emerged as a minority faith in the first centuries of the Common Era, increasingly shaped the political, social, and legal structures of the empire. Constantine I, who had consolidated imperial power by 324 AD after defeating Licinius, actively supported the Christian Church, while maintaining continuity with existing Roman administrative systems. Although pagan traditions persisted in many regions, imperial endorsement of Christianity marked a turning point in the integration of religious authority into state governance. Constantine's policies encouraged the formal organization of the Church within the empire. He convened the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, which aimed to resolve theological disputes, particularly the Arian controversy regarding the nature of Christ. The council established foundational elements of Christian doctrine, including the Nicene Creed, which articulated the relationship between God the Father and Jesus Christ. These developments reinforced imperial involvement in ecclesiastical matters, creating a precedent for future emperors to influence theological and organizational decisions within the Church. Constantine also granted privileges to bishops, integrating them into administrative and judicial roles in urban centers. This integration strengthened the authority of Christian leaders and aligned religious influence with the central government. The construction of Christian places of worship became a priority under Constantine and his successors. Significant projects included the Old St. Peter's Basilica in Rome and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, although the latter was more closely associated with the western provinces. In the eastern provinces, churches were constructed in Constantinople and other major urban centers, providing institutional space for the growing Christian population. These structures were not only places of worship, but also served as administrative centers for local communities, supporting education, charity, and legal adjudication. The development of these ecclesiastical institutions reinforced the organizational capacity of Christianity within the empire. Legislation under Constantine and subsequent emperors increasingly reflected Christian principles. Laws restricting pagan practices and promoting Christian observance were implemented across the empire. For example, pagan sacrifices were progressively limited, and certain civic honors previously reserved for traditional cults were redirected toward Christian institutions. Christian holidays began to receive official recognition, and Sunday observance was formalized as a day of rest in alignment with church practice. While enforcement varied across regions, these measures signaled the growing role of Christianity in shaping civic life, providing moral guidance, and legitimizing imperial authority. The Eastern Roman Empire's demographic composition influenced the spread of Christianity. Urban centers such as Antioch, Alexandria, and Constantinople had diverse populations that included Greek, Latin, and Semitic communities. These cities were centers of trade, culture, and intellectual activity, providing fertile ground for the dissemination of Christian ideas. The movement of populations, including veterans settled in Constantinople and administrative officials assigned to provincial posts, facilitated the integration of Christian practice into daily life. Christian communities often coexisted with traditional religious practices for several decades, resulting in a gradual rather than immediate transformation of societal norms. Education and intellectual activity were closely tied to religious development during this period. Christian schools emerged alongside existing pagan educational institutions, teaching biblical scripture, theological interpretation, and moral instruction. Bishops and clerics often acted as advisors to the emperor and provincial governors, providing counsel on both religious and civic matters. The alignment of intellectual authority with the Church strengthened the position of Christianity within society, allowing it to influence cultural production, legal interpretation, and political decision-making. This integration of education, religion, and governance created a framework for the long-term stability of Christian institutions in the Eastern Empire. Economic and administrative policies also reflected the growing influence of Christianity. The Church acquired significant landholdings, endowments, and charitable responsibilities, which allowed it to participate directly in the economic life of the empire. Christian institutions often provided relief to the poor, organized public works, and managed resources for communal benefit. The integration of ecclesiastical administration with imperial bureaucracy facilitated the collection of donations, the distribution of aid, and the maintenance of infrastructure. Over time, the economic capacity of the Church became a complement to imperial power, reinforcing both social cohesion and governmental authority. Religious uniformity became an increasing priority under Theodosius I, who reigned from 379 to 395 AD. In 380 AD, Theodosius issued the Edict of Thessalonica, declaring Nicene Christianity the official state religion of the Roman Empire. The edict mandated adherence to the Nicene Creed and identified bishops as the primary religious authorities, granting them responsibility for doctrinal enforcement and oversight of local communities. Theodosius's policies effectively marginalized pagan practices, while offering legal protection and imperial support to Christian institutions. This legislation consolidated the alliance between imperial and ecclesiastical authority, ensuring that the Eastern Roman Empire would maintain a Christian identity in both governance and culture. The suppression of pagan practices continued during this period, although implementation varied regionally. Temples were closed, sacrifices were prohibited, and traditional festivals were curtailed. Some pagan intellectuals and philosophers were integrated into Christian educational institutions, while others retired from public life or relocated. Despite these measures, pagan culture persisted in certain rural areas and among elite families, indicating that religious transformation was gradual and complex. Archaeological evidence from urban centers shows the coexistence of Christian churches and former pagan temples, reflecting the transitional nature of religious practice in the early Eastern Empire. Military and administrative structures adapted to the empire's Christian orientation. Religious authority became intertwined with governance, with bishops often involved in civic administration and dispute resolution. The alignment of spiritual and temporal power allowed emperors to consolidate authority and enforce legal and social norms. Military commanders were expected to respect ecclesiastical authority, and Christian clergy sometimes mediated conflicts between local populations and imperial officials. This integration reinforced the centralization of power and contributed to the stability of the Eastern Roman Empire during the 4th century. Theological disputes continued to influence the political landscape of the Eastern Empire. Arianism, which questioned the divinity of Christ, remained influential among certain populations and clergy, particularly in regions such as the Balkans and Egypt. Imperial involvement in these disputes aimed to maintain unity and prevent factional conflict that could undermine governance. Councils, including the First Council of Constantinople in 381 AD, were convened to address doctrinal differences and codify orthodoxy. These decisions reinforced the authority of Nicene Christianity, defined acceptable theological positions, and established precedents for imperial oversight of religious matters. The Eastern Roman Empire's integration of Christianity extended to legal and social institutions. Laws were enacted to regulate marriage, inheritance, and charitable practices in accordance with Christian principles. Clerics were granted immunity from certain civic duties and received authority to adjudicate disputes within their communities. Monasticism began to develop as an organized movement, with monks and ascetics establishing communities that contributed to education, manuscript preservation, and social services. These developments created enduring institutions that combined spiritual, social, and administrative functions, further embedding Christianity into the fabric of the empire. By the end of the 4th century, the Eastern Roman Empire had established a cohesive Christian identity. Constantine's initial support, followed by the policies of his successors in Theodosius I, created a framework in which the church and the state were closely linked. Christian doctrine influenced legislation, education, social services, and urban development. The alignment of ecclesiastical and imperial authority provided mechanisms for governance, dispute resolution, and social control. While pagan traditions did not disappear immediately, the dominance of Christianity reshaped the cultural, political, and legal landscape of the Eastern Empire. Following the death of Emperor Theodosius I in 395 AD, the Roman Empire was formally divided between his two sons, Honorius in the west and Arcadius in the east. This division was administrative and dynastic, reflecting the long-standing trend towards separate governance in the two halves of the empire. The Western Empire, headquartered initially in Milan and later in Ravenna, faced increasing pressure from migrating Germanic tribes, internal political instability, and economic challenges. The Eastern Empire, centered on Constantinople, retained stronger financial resources, a more urbanized population, and greater administrative stability, allowing it to endure while the West gradually declined. The Western Roman Empire experienced a series of internal and external crises during this period. Generals and regional leaders frequently exercised authority independently of the emperor, resulting in political fragmentation. The Visigoths, under the leadership of Alaric I, posed a significant threat to Rome and other Western cities. In 410 AD, the Visigoths sacked Rome, a symbolic event illustrating the weakness of Western authority, although the empire continued to exist in reduced form. Other groups, including the Vandals, Burgundians, Franks, and Ostrogoths, migrated into Western territories, often establishing their own kingdoms or serving as federated allies under Roman supervision. The cumulative impact of these migrations eroded the Western Empire's territorial integrity and economic capacity. In contrast, the Eastern Roman Empire maintained a stable administrative system that allowed for effective governance and military defense. The eastern provinces, including Asia Minor, the Levant, and Egypt, provided reliable sources of revenue through taxation, trade, and agricultural production. Constantinople's strategic location enabled the rapid deployment of forces to threaten regions and facilitated communication with key centers across the empire. The East's urban infrastructure, legal institutions, and bureaucratic networks supported a continuity of governance that the West could not replicate under similar pressures. Military strategy in the East evolved in response to ongoing threats from both the Persian Empire and various barbarian groups along the Danube frontier. Eastern emperors maintained a combination of standing border forces, known as limitanei, and mobile field armies, called comitatenses. Fortifications along strategic points, such as the Danube River, the Euphrates frontier, and key passes in Anatolia, were reinforced to resist invasion. The Eastern Army, also integrated allied contingents, including foederati recruited from neighboring tribes, which supplemented the regular forces while maintaining operational flexibility. This military organization allowed the East to resist invasions and maintain territorial cohesion even as the West experienced repeated incursions and territorial losses. Economically, the East remained robust due to its diversified resources. Egypt supplied grain, Anatolia provided agricultural and industrial products, and the Levant offered trade connections with the Persian Empire, India, and the Mediterranean. Constantinople controlled key maritime routes, collecting tolls and customs revenue from ships passing through the Bosporus and Dardanelles. Urban centers such as Alexandria, Antioch, and Thessalonica functioned as hubs of commerce, production, and taxation. The economic resilience of the East supported both civil administration and military readiness, while the West struggled with declining revenue and disrupted trade networks. The administrative continuity of the East was reinforced through legal and bureaucratic reforms. Roman law remained the basis of governance, and the imperial bureaucracy was structured to ensure oversight of provincial governors, tax collection, and judicial matters. Officials were appointed to monitor the implementation of policies and to maintain order across the provinces. This bureaucratic stability enabled the Eastern Empire to respond to crises with relative efficiency, in contrast to the West, where local military leaders and aristocrats often operated independently of central authority. Religious developments during this period further distinguished the Eastern Empire. Christianity, having been established as the state religion under Theodosius I, continued to influence governance, legal frameworks, and social policy. Bishops and other ecclesiastical officials were integrated into administrative structures, advising emperors, overseeing charitable institutions, and participating in urban governance. The Eastern Church developed in close alignment with imperial authority, establishing a hierarchy that would persist throughout Byzantine history. This integration of religion and state reinforced social cohesion and provided an additional source of legitimacy for Eastern rulers. The Eastern Empire also engaged in diplomacy and military conflict with neighboring powers to maintain stability. Relations with the Sasanian Persian Empire involved alternating periods of warfare and negotiated peace, with treaties often recognizing spheres of influence in contested regions such as Mesopotamia and Armenia. Defensive campaigns along the eastern frontier required coordination between provincial governors and central command, ensuring that Persian advances were contained and that frontier settlements remained secure. Diplomacy extended to barbarian groups along the Danube and in the Balkans, where alliances and treaties were used to manage potential threats without direct military confrontation whenever possible. Throughout this period, the Eastern Empire experienced internal political challenges, including succession disputes and factional competition among court officials and military leaders. Despite these pressures, the established administrative framework and Constantinople's strategic advantages enabled emperors to maintain control. Imperial authority in the East relied on the combination of a centralized bureaucracy, a well-resourced military, and economic stability. This framework allowed the Eastern Empire to survive as a cohesive political entity, while the Western Empire fragmented and ultimately ceased to exist as a unified state in 476 AD with the deposition of Romulus Augustulus. Cultural continuity in the East supported the resilience of the empire. Classical education, Roman law, and administrative practices were preserved, alongside the growing influence of Christian theology and institutions. Urban populations continued to participate in civic life, trade, and artisan production, sustaining economic and social structures. The preservation of these cultural and administrative norms reinforced the East's ability to govern effectively and maintain imperial identity, even as external pressures threatened the Western provinces. By the early 6th century, the Eastern Empire had developed a stable foundation for long-term survival. Its population centers, fortified cities, and economic networks provided resilience against external threats, while administrative continuity ensured that policies could be implemented effectively across diverse regions. Military organization, including the deployment of both frontier and mobile forces, allowed the empire to defend key territories and maintain order. The alignment of religious, legal, and political structures further strengthened cohesion, distinguishing the Eastern Roman Empire as a durable and organized state capable of surviving the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. In 527 AD, Justinian I ascended to the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire, becoming one of the most influential emperors of Byzantine history. His reign was marked by ambitious efforts to consolidate imperial authority, codify Roman law, expand the empire's territorial holdings, and strengthen administrative and religious institutions. Justinian inherited an empire that, while stable relative to the West, faced challenges in securing borders, maintaining military strength, and ensuring economic stability across its provinces. He approached these issues with a combination of legislative reform, military campaigns, architectural projects, and religious oversight. One of Justinian's most significant undertakings was the codification of Roman law. Before his reforms, the legal system had become complex and inconsistent, with overlapping imperial edicts, senatorial decrees, and local practices. Between 529 and 534 AD, Justinian commissioned a comprehensive compilation and revision of legal texts, resulting in the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law. This work included the Codex Justinianus, which collected existing imperial constitutions, the Digest, which summarized the writings of prominent jurists, the Institutes, a textbook for legal education, and the Novelli Constitutions, consisting of new legislation enacted during Justinian's reign. The codification systematized and clarified Roman law, providing a durable legal framework that influenced both Byzantine governance and, later, European legal tradition. The Corpus Juris Civilis reinforced central authority, ensuring consistency in judicial decisions, and provided a model for administrative governance throughout the empire. Justinian's reign also involved extensive military campaigns aimed at restoring territories that had been lost in the Western Roman Empire. Under the command of generals such as Belisarius and Narses, the Byzantine army conducted operations in North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain. The Vandal kingdom in North Africa was conquered between 533 and 534 AD, re-establishing Byzantine control over key economic and strategic regions, including Carthage and the grain-producing provinces of North Africa. In Italy, campaigns against the Ostrogoths, beginning in 535 AD, ultimately led to the temporary reconquest of the Italian peninsula by 554 AD, although military resistance and recurring Gothic uprisings prolonged the conflict. The campaign sought to restore imperial authority and secure the Mediterranean trade routes, reinforcing the Eastern Empire's economic and strategic position, although they placed significant strain on resources and manpower. Religious policy during Justinian's reign was closely integrated with imperial administration. He emphasized the promotion of Chalcedonian Christianity as defined by the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD and sought to suppress heretical movements, including Monophysitism, which maintained a strong presence in Egypt and Syria. Justinian intervened in theological disputes, supporting bishops aligned with imperial policy, and convened ecclesiastical synods to address doctrinal disagreements. Churches and monasteries were often patronized by the emperor, and religious law was incorporated into civil legislation. This integration of religious oversight and imperial authority reinforced social cohesion and centralized control while ensuring alignment between the church and the state. Architectural projects formed a visible component of Justinian's policies, reflecting both administrative function and religious devotion. The most notable example was the construction of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, completed in 537 AD. The church combined advanced engineering techniques with monumental design, serving as a central cathedral for the capital and symbolizing the fusion of imperial and religious authority. In addition to Hagia Sophia, Justinian commissioned fortifications, bridges, aqueducts, and churches throughout the empire, enhancing urban infrastructure, facilitating trade, and supporting military defense. Public works projects also provided employment and reinforced imperial presence in provincial cities. The Eastern Roman economy under Justinian was shaped by taxation and revenue systems designed to support both military and civil administration. The empire relied on taxes levied on land, trade, and urban property, as well as customs duties collected at ports such as Constantinople and Alexandria. Agricultural production in Egypt, Anatolia, and the Levant provided essential sustenance for urban populations and military forces. State control of strategic commodities, including grain and textiles, ensured stability in food supply and commerce. While Justinian's military campaigns expanded territory and influence, they also placed heavy fiscal demands on the treasury, necessitating reforms in tax collection and fiscal administration to sustain imperial operations. The plague of Justinian, which struck between 541 and 542 AD, represented a major challenge during this period. Caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the plague spread rapidly through Constantinople and other urban centers, resulting in significant mortality. Contemporary estimates suggest that the population of Constantinople may have decreased by as much as 40%, with broader effects across the eastern Mediterranean and North Africa. The epidemic disrupted trade, reduced agricultural output, and placed severe pressure on military recruitment and fiscal revenues. Despite these challenges, the administration implemented measures to maintain order, distribute food, and coordinate healthcare and relief, mitigating the immediate impact on governance. Justinian's military and administrative strategies also involved frontier defense and diplomatic engagement. The eastern border with the Sasanian Persian Empire remained a persistent concern, with periodic conflicts necessitating fortification of key cities and the deployment of troops to contested regions in Armenia and Mesopotamia. In the Balkans, Slavic and other migratory groups posed intermittent threats, prompting the reinforcement of defensive lines along rivers and passes. Diplomacy included negotiated truces, marriage alliances, and tribute arrangements, supplementing military efforts and stabilizing frontier regions. These combined measures enabled the Eastern Empire to preserve territorial integrity and maintain relative security during a period of both expansion and external challenge. Social and cultural aspects of the empire under Justinian were influenced by the intersection of Roman tradition and Christian orthodoxy. Educational institutions promoted the study of classical texts alongside Christian theology, producing a literate administrative class capable of supporting civil and ecclesiastical functions. Urban populations engaged in trade, craft production, and civic life, sustaining economic and social networks essential for imperial governance. Monastic communities contributed to education, manuscript preservation, and social services, reinforcing the role of religion in public and private life. This integration of culture, religion, and administration enhanced the resilience of the Eastern Roman Empire and supported the consolidation of imperial authority. Justinian's reign also included efforts to regulate and standardize imperial administration. Provincial governors, fiscal officers, and military commanders were accountable to central authorities, and mechanisms were developed for oversight, auditing, and coordination across regions. Legal reforms codified administrative procedures, clarified authority, and provided remedies for corruption or mismanagement. These measures strengthened the efficiency and effectiveness of governance, ensuring that provincial administration aligned with central policy and imperial objectives. By the end of Justinian's reign in 565 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire had achieved significant accomplishments in law, military expansion, religious integration, and urban development. While some military gains were temporary and the empire faced recurrent threats, the foundations laid during this period, particularly through codified law, centralized administration, and urban infrastructure, provided enduring structures for governance, military organization, and cultural development. The policies and institutions established under Justinian shaped the trajectory of the Eastern Roman Empire, reinforcing its identity as a distinct and resilient state in the Eastern Mediterranean. Following the death of Justinian I in 565 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire faced a period of considerable challenge, shaped by both internal difficulties and external pressures. The ambitious military and administrative policies of Justinian had expanded the empire's territorial reach, but these expansions placed a heavy burden on the treasury and administrative infrastructure. The empire's eastern and northern frontiers remained under constant threat from long-standing adversaries, and recurring outbreaks of plague, including the ongoing effects of the plague of Justinian, reduced population levels and economic productivity. Successive emperors inherited these challenges while attempting to preserve the stability and integrity of the state. One of the central difficulties in this period was maintaining territorial control. Justinian's conquests in Italy, North Africa, and parts of the Western Mediterranean had temporarily reasserted Byzantine authority over former Western Roman provinces. However, maintaining these regions required substantial military and administrative resources. The Italian peninsula, in particular, faced repeated Gothic revolts and was further destabilized by Lombard incursions beginning in 568 AD. North Africa, though reconquered from the Vandals, experienced unrest and difficulty in administration as local populations adjusted to Byzantine rule. The empire's capacity to govern these territories was constrained by distance, communication limitations, and the demands of defending core eastern provinces. Economically, The Eastern Empire continued to rely on the productivity of its urban centers and agricultural regions. Egypt remained a critical source of grain for Constantinople, while Anatolia supplied foodstuffs, textiles, and military recruits. Maritime trade through the Mediterranean and Black Sea ensured revenue from customs duties and commercial activity. However, repeated warfare, coupled with population losses from plague outbreaks, created fiscal pressures. Taxation policies had to balance revenue collection with the capacity of populations affected by depopulation and agricultural disruption. Urban centers, including Constantinople, Antioch, and Alexandria, maintained their economic significance, serving as hubs for administration, trade, and military provisioning. Military organization evolved in response to these pressures. Field armies, known as comitatenses, remained mobile forces capable of responding to frontier threats, while border troops, the limitanii, defended key locations. Fortifications along the Danube, the Euphrates, and the Anatolian Plateau were reinforced to address threats from external enemies. In the Balkans, Slavic and Avar incursions challenged the stability of frontier regions, requiring both defensive campaigns and diplomatic engagement to manage potential invasions. Eastern provinces were fortified through both engineering projects and administrative oversight, ensuring that local governors coordinated with central authorities in response to threats. Persian aggression represented a persistent challenge during this period. The Sasanian Empire, under the reign of Khosrow I, 531 to 579 AD, and his successors, sought to expand influence into Mesopotamia, Armenia, and the eastern frontier of Anatolia. This resulted in a series of conflicts and negotiated settlements over contested territories, with both empires investing heavily in military campaigns, fortifications, and diplomatic negotiations. The Byzantine-Persian frontier required careful management, as both sides engaged in protracted warfare while also seeking periods of truce to stabilize border regions and manage economic resources. The ongoing impact of plague further compounded military and economic difficulties. Mortality rates remained high, reducing the availability of agricultural labor, urban artisans, and military recruits. Food production in key regions declined, leading to localized shortages and increased fiscal strain on the government. Administrative systems adapted to manage these effects by adjusting tax assessments, maintaining granaries, and coordinating relief measures for affected populations. Despite these challenges, the empire's core territories retained sufficient resilience to support continued governance, military operations, and urban life. Social and cultural structures in the empire continued to evolve during this period. Christian institutions played a central role in public life, providing education, charitable services, and administrative support. Bishops and clerics participated in civic governance, mediating disputes and assisting in the implementation of imperial policy. Monastic communities contributed to both spiritual and practical functions, including manuscript preservation, literacy, and charitable work. The integration of ecclesiastical authority with imperial administration reinforced social cohesion, providing stability amid population losses and regional unrest. Religious policy during this period was also shaped by theological disputes and imperial intervention. Chalcedonian Christianity remained the officially endorsed doctrine, while alternative interpretations, particularly Monophysitism in Egypt and Syria, presented challenges to uniformity. Emperors and church authorities engaged in ongoing efforts to enforce doctrinal conformity, including the appointment of bishops aligned with imperial policy and the regulation of religious practices in contested regions. The coordination of ecclesiastical and civil authority strengthened central control and allowed the empire to maintain cohesion across diverse provinces. During the reign of Emperor Heraclius, 610 to 641 AD, the Eastern Empire faced the most severe external threat of the period, the Byzantine-Sasanian War of 602 to 628 AD. This conflict was precipitated by political instability within the Persian Empire, border disputes, and prior Byzantine administrative failures in contested territories. Early in the war, Persian forces captured key eastern provinces, including Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, bringing them under Sasanian control. These losses threatened the empire's economic base, particularly the grain supply from Egypt and the trade revenues from Levantine ports. Heraclius undertook extensive military reforms to respond to this crisis, reorganizing the army, improving logistics, and consolidating forces capable of conducting offensive operations to reclaim lost territory. Heraclius's campaigns involved significant strategic planning and logistical coordination. He employed a combination of mobile field armies, fortified garrisons, and intelligence gathering to undermine Persian advances. Between 622 and 627 AD, Heraclius conducted a series of offensives that penetrated deep into Persian territory, culminating in a decisive victory at the Battle of Nineveh in 627 AD. The subsequent peace treaty, negotiated in 628 AD, restored previously lost Byzantine territories, including Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia. This outcome reaffirmed the empire's eastern borders and restored critical economic and strategic regions, allowing the Eastern Roman Empire to maintain its position as a dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean. The military and administrative reforms of Heraclius also had long-term implications for the empire. The establishment of the theme system, although fully developed in later decades, began during this period as a means of integrating military and civil administration in provincial regions. Soldiers were settled on land in return for service, providing both defense and agricultural productivity. This system allowed for greater flexibility in responding to external threats while maintaining local governance and economic activity. It also reduced reliance on distant central garrisons and provided a sustainable model for provincial security in the face of continuing external pressures. The rise of Islam in the early 7th century introduced a new challenge for the Eastern Roman Empire. Following the unification of the Arabian Peninsula under Muhammad and subsequent expansion under the Rashidun Caliphate, Byzantine territories in Syria, Palestine, and Egypt faced repeated incursions. The rapid conquest of these regions after 634 AD exposed vulnerabilities created by prior wars and demographic depletion due to plague. The Eastern Roman military, while resilient and strategically reorganized, was gradually compelled to adapt to a new type of adversary employing mobile cavalry and coordinated raids across previously secure territories. Despite these external pressures, the Eastern Empire retained a strong administrative core centered on Constantinople. Imperial officials coordinated taxation, military provisioning, and diplomatic efforts across the provinces, while urban centers served as nodes of commerce, governance, and cultural activity. The resilience of Constantinople itself, reinforced with walls and strategic defenses, provided a secure base for administration, trade, and military operations, allowing the empire to endure through repeated external crises. During this period, legal and bureaucratic institutions continued to function effectively. Provincial governors, fiscal officers, and military commanders operated under centralized oversight, maintaining consistency in taxation, law enforcement, and military obligations. Codified laws from the Justinian period remained in use, guiding judicial decisions and administrative actions. Religious institutions were integrated into these structures, with bishops and clerics overseeing both ecclesiastical and social functions, including education, charitable work, and dispute resolution. This combination of legal, administrative, and religious frameworks reinforced cohesion and continuity during a time of demographic and territorial stress. By the end of Heraclius's reign in 641 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire had faced unprecedented challenges, including plague, territorial loss, Persian invasion, and the emergence of a new regional power in the form of the Arab Caliphate. Through military reform, administrative continuity, and reliance on the resilience of Constantinople and the eastern provinces, the empire was able to maintain its core territories, stabilize governance, and prepare for the transformations that would follow under successive rulers. The period from 565 to 641 AD represents a critical transition in Byzantine history, illustrating both the vulnerabilities and adaptive capacities of the Eastern Roman state in the face of multiple, simultaneous crises. Following the death of Emperor Heraclius in 641 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire entered a period of significant strategic and territorial challenge. Heraclius's campaigns against the Sasanian Persians had restored eastern provinces, but the empire faced a new adversary emerging from the Arabian Peninsula. The early Muslim conquests, initiated under the Rashidun Caliphate, rapidly transformed the geopolitical landscape of the Near East. Byzantine territories in Syria, Palestine, and Egypt were particularly vulnerable, and over the subsequent decades, the empire's capacity to maintain control over these regions was severely tested. The rapid Arab expansion between 632 and 661 AD resulted in the permanent loss of large portions of the empire's eastern provinces. Cities such as Damascus, Jerusalem, and Alexandria were captured in successive campaigns, often after extended sieges or negotiated surrenders. These regions had previously been integral to the economic and administrative structure of the Eastern Roman Empire. Egypt supplied grain to Constantinople, while Syria and Palestine provided revenue through trade and taxation. The loss of these territories not only reduced imperial revenue, but also removed critical logistical and strategic assets, including urban infrastructure, ports, and fortified settlements. The military response of the Eastern Roman Empire during this period relied on both defensive fortifications and tactical innovation. The Byzantine navy played a critical role in securing maritime approaches to key cities, protecting Constantinople, and maintaining lines of communication and supply. The development and deployment of Greek fire, an incendiary weapon capable of projecting flames onto enemy ships, provided a decisive advantage in naval engagements. Although the precise composition of Greek fire remains uncertain, contemporary accounts indicate that it allowed relatively small Byzantine fleets to repel larger Arab forces during naval operations, particularly in the waters surrounding Constantinople. Greek fire became a key component of Byzantine defensive strategy and contributed to the preservation of the capital during sieges. The first significant Arab siege of Constantinople occurred in 674 to 678 AD under the leadership of the Umayyad Caliph Muawiyah I. Arab forces aimed to capture the city and extend control over the strategically vital Bosporus and the eastern Mediterranean. The siege involved both land-based and naval operations, with Arab armies attempting to breach city walls and cut off supplies by sea. Byzantine defenders, under Emperor Constantine IV, implemented layered fortifications, reinforced walls, and coordinated naval patrols equipped with Greek fire. The city's defensive infrastructure included the Theodosian walls, a multi-tiered system of walls, towers, and moats originally constructed in the 5th century, which proved critical in resisting direct assaults. The successful defense during this siege demonstrated the importance of combined land and naval fortifications, disciplined military organization, and technological innovation in sustaining Byzantine survival. Thematic and administrative reforms accompanied military responses during this period. The empire increasingly relied on the theme system, which organized provinces into military districts governed by strategoi responsible for both civil administration and defense. Soldiers were settled on land within the themes and provided military service in exchange for property rights and local authority. This system allowed the Byzantine state to maintain a sustainable defensive posture with a decentralized yet organized military structure. Themes facilitated rapid mobilization of local forces, reduced dependence on long-distance troop deployments, and integrated military, administrative, and economic responsibilities at the provincial level. The development of the theme system was a response to the empire's need to adapt to new threats and conserve resources amid ongoing external pressure. During this period, the Eastern Roman Empire also engaged in diplomatic and strategic negotiations with neighboring powers. Although the empire had lost significant territories in the Near East and North Africa, alliances and treaties were sought wherever possible to delay further incursions and stabilize border regions. Diplomatic missions often included negotiating truces, exchanging prisoners, and arranging payment of tribute or provisioning of garrisons to prevent immediate military confrontation. The combination of defensive engineering, military innovation, and diplomacy allowed the Eastern Roman Empire to maintain a secure core territory centered on Constantinople and the Anatolian heartland. Urban and economic management were closely tied to defensive strategy. Constantinople's population relied on grain imports, water supply, and fortified food storage systems to withstand prolonged sieges. The city's logistical capacity was enhanced through careful planning, including the construction of cisterns and aqueducts to ensure water availability, storage of essential commodities, and coordination of trade routes through secure maritime passages. Urban governance also involved the organization of local militias, maintenance of city walls and gates, and allocation of housing for soldiers and support personnel. The integration of civic and military administration contributed to the resilience of Constantinople during this critical period. The impact of the Arab conquests extended beyond military and economic considerations. Culturally and religiously, the loss of regions such as Syria, Palestine, and Egypt altered the composition of the Eastern Roman Empire. Christian communities in these areas came under new political authority, and the empire's religious leadership was compelled to adapt to the reduced geographic scope of its jurisdiction. Bishops and clerics remaining within Byzantine-controlled territory assumed increased responsibilities for guiding ecclesiastical policy, supervising religious education, and maintaining liturgical and doctrinal consistency. These developments reinforced the centralization of religious authority within the surviving Byzantine provinces and the capital, ensuring continuity in governance and cultural practice despite territorial contraction. Throughout the first decades of Arab pressure, the empire faced repeated military and administrative challenges. Raids and localized incursions occurred along the eastern and southern frontiers, necessitating continual fortification, troop deployment, and logistical coordination. Coastal cities and key maritime routes were protected by naval patrols and defensive structures, while inland provinces relied on theme-based militias and local fortifications. These measures were essential in preventing further immediate losses and in maintaining the functional integrity of the empire. The period also witnessed the consolidation of Byzantine identity in response to external threats. Administrative and military reforms reinforced the connection between imperial authority and local governance, integrating provincial leaders into a hierarchical system designed to ensure loyalty, rapid response, and resource mobilization. The continued use of Greek as the administrative language, combined with the preservation of Roman legal traditions and Christian orthodoxy, reinforced the cultural and institutional continuity of the Eastern Roman Empire. These measures allowed the empire to endure external pressures while maintaining the structures of governance, law, and religion that defined Byzantine identity. The Arab siege of 717 to 718 AD represented the culmination of the first wave of large-scale external threat to Constantinople. Arab forces, led by Caliph Sulayman ibn Abd al-Malik and his generals, advanced with a combined land and naval force aimed at the capture of the capital. Byzantine preparation under Emperor Leo III included reinforcement of city walls, mobilization of themed forces, deployment of the navy equipped with Greek fire, and strategic use of terrain to disrupt enemy operations. The siege was prolonged and involved extensive attempts to blockade the city and breach fortifications, but the coordinated defense successfully repelled the attackers. The failure of the siege solidified the Eastern Roman Empire's territorial core and demonstrated the effectiveness of technological innovation, strategic fortification, and administrative coordination in the defense of the state. The successful defense of Constantinople during this period had long-term implications for Byzantine military strategy and administrative organization. Greek fire became a standard component of naval defense. Themes were further developed to integrate local governance with military responsibility, and the empire's leadership emphasized the importance of both central oversight and provincial autonomy in maintaining security. The combination of fortification, technology, military organization, and administrative adaptation provided a model for the empire's survival in the face of ongoing external threats. By 717 to 718 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire had preserved its core territories in Anatolia, Thrace, and the capital city, while territories to the south and east had been permanently lost to Arab expansion. The period from 641 to 717 AD demonstrated the necessity of adapting military, administrative, and economic structures to a transformed strategic environment. The integration of technological innovation, defensive engineering, theme-based military organization, and centralized administration enabled the empire to maintain territorial integrity, secure its population centers, and preserve the institutional framework essential for long-term stability. By the early 8th century, the Eastern Roman Empire had emerged from the immediate crises of the 7th century, including the Arab conquests and recurring plague outbreaks, with a territorial core centered on Anatolia, Thrace, and the Aegean Islands. This period, roughly spanning 700 to 800 AD, witnessed significant developments in the empire's economic structures, social organization, and administrative practices, laying the groundwork for sustained resilience despite ongoing external pressures. The Byzantine economy relied on a combination of agricultural production, control of trade routes, and the efficient management of urban and rural fiscal systems. These factors allowed the empire to support both military and administrative functions while sustaining urban populations across its territories. Agriculture remained the foundation of Byzantine economic stability. Anatolia, the empire's most extensive and productive province, provided the majority of grain, olive oil, wine, and livestock consumed within the empire. Land tenure was organized through a combination of privately owned estates, imperial landholdings, and smaller peasant plots. The theme system, developed in the 7th century, integrated military service with agricultural responsibility, assigning soldiers plots of land in exchange for their service in provincial defense. This system enhanced agricultural productivity, ensured local security, and reinforced imperial authority in rural regions. Agricultural surpluses from these territories were transported to urban centers, including Constantinople, where they supported both civilian populations and the provisioning of armies. Trade formed a second pillar of the Byzantine economy during this period. Constantinople's strategic location at the junction of the Black Sea, the Aegean Sea, and major land routes enabled control over trade flows between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Markets in the capital, as well as in provincial cities such as Thessalonica, Antioch, and Alexandria, facilitated the exchange of grain, textiles, metalwork, spices, and luxury goods. Byzantine merchants engaged in both maritime and overland trade, maintaining connections with Italian city-states, the Islamic caliphates, the Balkans, and the northern Black Sea regions. Customs duties, tolls, and port fees contributed to state revenue, supporting administrative operations, military expenditures, and urban infrastructure projects. Urban centers in the Byzantine Empire exhibited a complex social and economic organization. Cities functioned as hubs of administration, commerce, and cultural activity, with populations composed of a diverse array of merchants, artisans, civil servants, and clerics. Urban governance was structured to maintain order, collect taxes, and coordinate services such as water supply, public works, and marketplaces. Artisans produced textiles, metal goods, pottery, and other essential commodities, often organized into guilds or professional associations that regulated quality, production, and pricing. Trade networks extended within cities, between cities, and internationally, ensuring the circulation of goods necessary for both daily consumption and long-distance commerce. The Byzantine coinage system provided a stable medium for economic activity. The gold solidus, introduced in the early 4th century, remained the standard unit of currency, facilitating trade across the empire and with foreign states. Its consistent weight and purity enhanced confidence in commercial transactions and allowed the empire to collect taxes and pay soldiers and officials efficiently. Silver and bronze coins supplemented the gold solidus for smaller transactions, circulating primarily within local markets. The reliability of the monetary system contributed to economic stability and allowed the state to finance military campaigns, public works, and administrative operations without significant inflationary pressures. Taxation was central to both economic management and state administration. Land taxes, levied on agricultural production, formed the primary source of revenue. Urban property taxes, trade duties, and various indirect taxes complemented land-based revenue. Tax collection was overseen by provincial administrators who coordinated with central authorities in Constantinople to ensure compliance, minimize fraud, and maintain fiscal accountability. Military obligations, particularly under the theme system, were integrated into taxation policies, with soldiers providing service in exchange for land tenure or exemptions. This integration strengthened both military readiness and fiscal stability, ensuring that economic resources supported defense and governance simultaneously. Byzantine society during this period was shaped by hierarchical structures that linked the emperor, administrative officials, military commanders, clergy, and the general population. The emperor remained the central authority, with both secular and religious responsibilities, while provincial governors and strategoi executed policies in local regions. Urban elites, including merchants and landowners, played a role in civic administration and contributed to local economic and social stability. Artisans, laborers, and peasants formed the backbone of production, maintaining agricultural output, crafts, and services essential for urban life and military provisioning. Religious institutions, including monasteries and churches, were integrated into these social hierarchies, providing education, charitable services, and administrative support. Religious institutions were particularly influential in shaping social cohesion and cultural continuity. Monastic communities preserved manuscripts, provided education, and offered relief to the poor and sick. Bishops and clergy participated in governance by mediating disputes, advising imperial authorities, and supervising charitable functions. The alignment of religious authority with the state reinforced the emperor's legitimacy and promoted doctrinal uniformity, particularly in the context of ongoing theological debates following the iconoclastic controversies that would begin later in the 8th century. Christianity was both a spiritual and administrative framework, shaping laws, customs, and social norms across the empire. Infrastructure and urban planning contributed to the economic and social resilience of the empire. Constantinople, as the imperial capital, maintained sophisticated water supply systems, including aqueducts and cisterns, which ensured access to potable water during both peacetime and sieges. Roads, bridges, and ports facilitated trade, troop movements, and communication between provinces. Fortifications protected key cities from external threats, while warehouses and granaries ensured the storage and distribution of essential commodities. These investments in infrastructure allowed the empire to sustain both civilian populations and military operations, reinforcing the capacity of the state to respond to internal and external pressures. Education and culture remained significant in this period, sustaining administrative efficiency and intellectual continuity. Schools provided instruction in classical literature, rhetoric, mathematics, and Christian theology, preparing administrators, clerics, and professionals to participate in governance and social management. Literary production, historical writing, and religious scholarship continued, preserving knowledge from the Roman period while adapting to the realities of Byzantine society. This intellectual continuity supported bureaucratic competence, theological debate, and cultural cohesion, enabling the empire to maintain its identity despite territorial contraction and external threats. Military organization was closely tied to the empire's economic and social structures. Theme-based armies combined local recruitment, agricultural responsibility, and administrative oversight to maintain a sustainable defensive capability. Soldiers were trained, equipped, and mobilized through provincial administration, reducing reliance on distant central garrisons. Fortified cities and strategic positions provided defense against potential Arab incursions, Slavic raids, and internal unrest. This integration of military, economic, and administrative systems ensured that resources were used efficiently and that the empire remained capable of defending its core territories. Trade networks extended beyond the Mediterranean, connecting the Byzantine Empire to regions including the Black Sea, the Balkans, and the Islamic caliphates. Luxury goods, including silks, spices, and precious metals, traveled along these routes, generating revenue and reinforcing diplomatic relationships. Trade was regulated through state supervision of ports, customs duties, and urban markets, ensuring that economic activity contributed to both prosperity and imperial authority. The combination of agricultural production, urban commerce, and long-distance trade provided a diversified and resilient economic base capable of sustaining the empire's administrative and military needs. By the end of the 8th century, the Byzantine economy and society were characterized by resilience, adaptability, and integration of military, administrative, and religious structures. Agricultural productivity, urban commerce, and state-controlled trade supported both the population and the military. Administrative oversight ensured fiscal accountability, provincial coordination, and continuity of governance. Religious institutions contributed to social cohesion, cultural continuity, and administrative support. Military organization, particularly through the theme system, allowed the empire to respond to external threats while maintaining productive rural economies. Together, these factors enabled the Eastern Roman Empire to maintain stability, reinforce its identity, and adapt to the geopolitical transformations of the early medieval period. The period from 717 to 867 AD in the Eastern Roman Empire was marked not only by military and political challenges, but also by a profound religious controversy that had lasting effects on Byzantine society and governance. This was the era of Iconoclasm, a movement characterized by the rejection, removal, and destruction of religious images or icons, which became a defining conflict between church and state. The iconoclast controversy was initiated under Emperor Leo III in 726 AD and continued intermittently for over a century, shaping the political, social, and religious fabric of the Byzantine Empire. The origins of Byzantine iconoclasm are multifaceted, involving theological, political, and social considerations. Theologically, some Byzantine leaders questioned the appropriateness of venerating physical images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the saints, arguing that such practices violated the commandment against idolatry. Influences from Judaic and Islamic critiques of figurative representation contributed to these debates, particularly given the empire's proximity to Muslim-controlled territories following the Arab conquests. The theological discourse was complex and included contributions from monks, bishops, and imperial advisors, reflecting differing interpretations of scripture and church tradition. Politically, iconoclasm also served as a tool to consolidate imperial authority. By challenging the influence of monasteries, which were centers of icon production, theological learning, and wealth, emperors such as Leo III sought to reduce the autonomy and political power of ecclesiastical institutions. Monasteries had accumulated substantial land holdings and wealth, allowing them to exert influence over local and imperial governance. Iconoclastic policies facilitated the redistribution of church resources, strengthened imperial oversight of religious institutions, and reinforced the emperor's role as both secular and spiritual authority within the state. The first phase of Byzantine iconoclasm, initiated by Leo III, involved the issuance of edicts prohibiting the creation, veneration, and display of religious images. These edicts were implemented across the empire, affecting churches, monasteries, and private households. Iconoclast emperors mandated the removal or destruction of existing icons, while promoting the use of symbolic or abstract decoration in religious and public spaces. Enforcement varied across regions, with some areas resisting imperial directives and maintaining icon veneration in local communities. The conflict created tensions between the central authority and provincial religious leaders, contributing to periodic unrest and administrative challenges. Empress Irene of Athens and other intervening figures temporarily restored icon veneration during periods of political transition, demonstrating the intermittent nature of the controversy. This restoration included synods and councils that reaffirmed the theological legitimacy of icons, re-establishing their role in liturgy, education, and devotional practice. Despite these restorations, subsequent emperors resumed iconoclastic policies, reflecting ongoing debates over theology, imperial prerogative, and social control. The back-and-forth nature of these policies created instability within ecclesiastical hierarchies and affected the daily religious practices of the population. Iconoclasm had significant social consequences. Monks and clergy who supported icon veneration often faced persecution, exile, or execution, particularly in regions where imperial enforcement was strongest. Monasteries, deprived of income derived from the production and sale of icons, experienced economic disruption. Conversely, those who adhered to iconoclastic policies could gain imperial favor, leading to shifts in local leadership and resource allocation. Lay populations were affected as well, as religious observances, private devotion, and communal worship were influenced by the presence or absence of icons. These shifts impacted community cohesion, local identity, and the transmission of religious knowledge and artistic traditions. Cultural and artistic production was profoundly affected by iconoclasm. Byzantine artists, previously engaged in the creation of figurative religious imagery, were compelled to adapt to new stylistic norms emphasizing geometric patterns, symbolic motifs, and abstract decoration. Architectural ornamentation in churches reflected these changes, with mosaics, frescoes, and carvings avoiding depictions of Christ, saints, or biblical scenes in areas under iconoclastic influence. These adaptations influenced Byzantine art for generations, even after the restoration of icon veneration, leaving a legacy of both innovation and disruption in visual culture. The controversy also shaped the relationship between the Eastern Roman Empire and the wider Christian world. Western European churches, which maintained the veneration of icons, often viewed Byzantine iconoclast policies with suspicion or disapproval. Diplomatic and ecclesiastical tensions emerged as a result, affecting relations with the papacy and Latin Christendom. Byzantine attempts to assert theological authority through iconoclastic policy sometimes undermine broader alliances and complicated communication between Constantinople and Western religious authorities. The controversy highlighted the complex interplay between theology, politics, and diplomacy within the context of imperial governance. Military and administrative consequences were intertwined with the iconoclast controversy. Provincial governors and strategoi were responsible for implementing imperial religious policies, sometimes in regions where local populations were resistant. This required careful coordination, enforcement measures, and occasional military intervention to ensure compliance with edicts. Additionally, resources previously allocated to monasteries or religious institutions supporting icon veneration were redirected towards state projects, military provisioning, and fortification efforts. By integrating religious reform with administrative and military priorities, emperors sought to reinforce centralized control while pursuing broader strategic objectives. The second phase of iconoclasm, beginning under Emperor Leo V in 813 AD and continuing under his successors, reflected renewed imperial commitment to the suppression of icons. Policies during this period were more systematic, incorporating councils, synods, and legal measures to enforce compliance throughout the empire. Opposition continued, particularly among monastic communities and in regions with strong devotional traditions. The persistence of dissent and the oscillation between iconoclast and iconophile policies contributed to long-term political instability, affecting succession, governance, and social cohesion. Nevertheless, the empire maintained functional administrative, military, and economic systems despite these internal challenges. By 843 AD, Empress Theodora implemented the final restoration of icon veneration, concluding the formal phases of the iconoclast controversy. This restoration, commemorated as the triumph of orthodoxy, re-established the theological legitimacy of icons, reinstated monastic communities, and reinforced the symbiotic relationship between church and state. Churches and monasteries resumed the production and display of religious imagery, reviving artistic traditions and devotional practices. Imperial and ecclesiastical authorities coordinated to ensure that icon veneration was aligned with both theological orthodoxy and administrative oversight, providing continuity in governance and reinforcing cultural identity. Throughout the period of iconoclasm, the Eastern Roman Empire demonstrated resilience in the face of internal religious conflict. Despite persecution, economic disruption, and cultural upheaval, the empire maintained administrative cohesion, defended its territories, and continued to engage in diplomatic and military affairs. The theme system, urban governance structures, and centralized bureaucratic institutions provided the framework for managing internal divisions, implementing policy, and preserving core functions of the state. Religious reform, while contentious, was integrated into the broader mechanisms of imperial control, illustrating the complex interdependence of theology, governance, and society in Byzantine history. The iconoclast controversy also left a lasting legacy on Byzantine culture, art, and society. The oscillation between iconoclast and iconophile periods fostered both innovation and conservation in artistic production, influencing mosaics, frescoes, and manuscript illumination. Monastic scholarship, preserved despite suppression, contributed to historical writing, theological commentary, and the continuity of classical knowledge. Administrative and military adaptations developed in response to the controversy reinforced the empire's capacity to manage complex social and religious dynamics. The resolution of the controversy ultimately strengthened the integration of religious and imperial authority, ensuring that the Byzantine state could navigate internal divisions while maintaining external stability. By the mid-9th century, the Eastern Roman Empire had emerged from the Iconoclast controversy with a consolidated religious framework, renewed cultural production, and a more centralized administrative system. The resolution of theological disputes, restoration of monastic communities, and reintegration of religious art reinforced both cultural identity and imperial authority. The period of iconoclasm demonstrates the capacity of the Byzantine state to endure sustained internal conflict, adapt institutional structures, and maintain societal cohesion in a complex and evolving geopolitical environment. The period from 867 to 1056 AD, known as the Macedonian Renaissance, was a transformative era for the Eastern Roman Empire, marked by political consolidation, military expansion, economic revival, and cultural flourishing. The dynasty began with the accession of Basil I in 867 AD and continued under his successors, including Leo VI, Constantine VII, Romanos I, and ultimately Basil II, who is often remembered as one of Byzantium's most effective military leaders and administrators. This period represents a high point in Byzantine history, characterized by the stabilization of borders, the strengthening of imperial authority, and the revival of arts, literature, and education. Basil I, originally of Armenian origin, came to power following a period of political instability in the empire. His rise to the throne consolidated the authority of the Macedonian dynasty and established a precedent for administrative reform and centralization of power. Early in his reign, Basil focused on internal stabilization, reorganizing the bureaucracy, reinforcing the theme system, and ensuring loyalty among provincial governors and military commanders. The emperor also strengthened the imperial court, using appointments and patronage to secure political support and reduce factionalism that had destabilized prior regimes. Basil I's focus on governance laid the foundation for both territorial expansion and administrative efficiency in the decades that followed. Military organization was a central concern during the Macedonian Renaissance. The empire faced threats on multiple fronts, including Arab forces in the east, Bulgars and Slavs in the Balkans, and nomadic groups in the northeastern frontier. Byzantine military strategy emphasized both defensive and offensive operations, combining fortified positions, disciplined thematic armies, and professional central forces. Strategic campaigns during Basil I's reign and that of his successors secured the eastern frontier, defended key maritime routes, and reasserted Byzantine influence in the Balkans and southern Italy. The integration of professional and provincial forces allowed the empire to respond to threats with flexibility and sustain long-term campaigns while minimizing disruption to local economies. The relationship with the Bulgarian Empire was a central aspect of Byzantine foreign policy during this period. The Bulgars, under leaders such as Simeon I, challenged Byzantine authority in the Balkans, engaging in repeated military conflict. Byzantine emperors employed a combination of military action, diplomacy, and strategic marriage alliances to manage relations with the Bulgarian state. Treaties were negotiated to delineate borders, regulate tribute, and establish periods of peace, while military campaigns were conducted to secure contested territories and protect key trade routes. These efforts maintained Byzantine influence in the Balkans and preserved the stability of the empire's northern frontier. Economically, the Macedonian Renaissance was marked by revival and expansion. Agricultural productivity improved through the management of estates, the collection of taxes, and the integration of the theme system, which provided both defense and agricultural output. Urban centers, including Constantinople, Thessalonica, and regional capitals, experienced growth as trade networks expanded throughout the Mediterranean, Black Sea, and beyond. Byzantine merchants engaged with Italian city-states, the Islamic world, and Northern Europe, trading goods such as grain, wine, olive oil, textiles, metals, and luxury items. The stability provided by centralized governance, military security, and legal continuity facilitated economic expansion, supported urban prosperity, and generated revenue for the state. The Macedonian Renaissance also witnessed a flowering of culture, literature, and education. Scholars, often affiliated with monasteries and court institutions, engaged in the preservation and study of classical Greek texts, the production of historical chronicles, and the compilation of encyclopedic works. Constantine's 7 Porphyrogenitos, for example, authored detailed treatises on governance, ceremonial, and military organization, reflecting the intellectual sophistication of the period. Manuscript production, copying of texts, and the creation of illuminated works strengthened educational networks and preserved knowledge that had survived the challenges of the 7th and 8th centuries. These efforts reinforced the continuity of Byzantine intellectual and cultural traditions while adapting them to the needs of a medieval state. Religious life remained central to Byzantine society, with the Orthodox Church integrated into both governance and cultural expression. Monasteries, churches, and ecclesiastical leaders played active roles in education, charitable work, and the administration of local affairs. The Macedonian dynasty supported the construction and restoration of churches and monastic institutions, often incorporating architectural and artistic innovations that reflected the renewed emphasis on religious and cultural identity. Liturgical practices, theological scholarship, and iconography flourished under imperial patronage, demonstrating the interconnection between religious authority and state power during this period. Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, epitomized the military and administrative strength of the Macedonian Renaissance. His reign, from 976 to 1025 AD, combined strategic military campaigns with effective governance. Basil II conducted extensive campaigns against Bulgaria, culminating in the subjugation of the Bulgarian Empire and the incorporation of its territory into the Byzantine state. These campaigns involved careful logistical planning, disciplined troop deployment, and the coordinated use of both thematic armies and central forces. Basil II's approach reinforced Byzantine control over the Balkans, secured trade routes, and expanded the empire's territorial and political influence. Administrative reform continued alongside military expansion. Provincial governors and strategoi were assigned clear responsibilities for both civil and military administration, ensuring efficient governance across the empire's territories. Bureaucratic structures were strengthened, allowing for standardized tax collection, legal adjudication, and coordination of military resources. The emperor maintained central oversight through court officials and the imperial chancery, ensuring that policies implemented in distant provinces aligned with overall strategic objectives. This administrative rigor enhanced state stability, promoted loyalty among local elites, and allowed the empire to sustain long-term campaigns and governance initiatives. Trade and economic exchange were integral to sustaining both military and administrative operations. Byzantine merchants operated within a network that extended from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea and into northern Europe, facilitating the movement of essential commodities and luxury goods. The state regulated trade through customs duties, port supervision, and market control, ensuring that commerce contributed to both urban prosperity and imperial revenue. Currency, particularly the gold solidus, remained a stable medium for transactions, supporting both domestic markets and international trade. Economic resilience enabled the empire to fund military campaigns, maintain fortifications, and support the infrastructure necessary for administrative efficiency. Artistic and architectural achievements during the Macedonian Renaissance reflected the integration of classical heritage with Byzantine innovation. Church construction and decoration incorporated mosaics, frescoes, and sculptural elements that combined religious symbolism with aesthetic refinement. Iconography, liturgical objects, and manuscript illumination reflected theological principles while demonstrating technical skill and artistic sophistication. The patronage of emperors and elites facilitated the preservation of cultural heritage, the continuation of classical traditions, and the development of a distinct Byzantine artistic identity. Education and intellectual life were closely linked to both administrative needs and cultural expression. Court schools, monastic institutions, and urban centers provided instruction in classical literature, rhetoric, theology, law, and military strategy. Historical writing, encyclopedic compilations, and legal codices were produced to support governance, preserve knowledge, and reinforce the legitimacy of the Macedonian dynasty. Scholars contributed to the continuity of Roman administrative principles while adapting them to the evolving social, political, and military context of the 9th and 10th centuries. This intellectual activity reinforced the cohesion and identity of the empire, integrating governance, religion, and culture into a coherent societal framework. The Macedonian Renaissance also emphasized the importance of diplomacy and strategic alliances. Byzantine emperors engaged with neighboring states, including the Holy Roman Empire, the Bulgarian Empire, and Italian principalities, to secure borders, facilitate trade, and coordinate responses to external threats. Diplomatic marriages, treaties, and negotiations were used to reinforce Byzantine influence, manage potential conflicts, and integrate regional powers into the broader political framework of the empire. These diplomatic efforts complemented military campaigns and administrative reforms, ensuring the empire's stability and strategic positioning in both the Balkans and the Mediterranean. By the mid-11th century, the Macedonian Renaissance had firmly established the Eastern Roman Empire as a resilient and cohesive state. Military strength, administrative efficiency, economic vitality, cultural achievement, and religious cohesion combined to create a period of unprecedented stability and influence. The reforms, policies, and achievements of the Macedonian dynasty provided the structural, cultural, and intellectual foundation for subsequent Byzantine history, allowing the empire to navigate the complexities of regional geopolitics, economic management, and societal organization with sustained effectiveness. The period of 867 to 1056 AD demonstrates the capacity of the Eastern Roman Empire to recover from earlier crises, consolidate power, and cultivate a lasting legacy in governance, military strategy, economic management, and cultural production. The integration of these elements ensured that Byzantium remained a dominant regional power, preserving Roman traditions while adapting to the challenges and opportunities of the medieval period. The Macedonian Renaissance stands as a testament to the empire's ability to harmonize military, administrative, religious, and cultural priorities in the pursuit of stability, expansion, and enduring influence. The period from 1057 to 1180 AD, known as the Komnenian Revival, was a significant phase in Byzantine history characterized by political stabilization, military reform, territorial defense, and economic recovery following the instability of the mid-11th century. This era began with the accession of Alexios I Komnenos in 1057 AD, whose reforms and policies laid the foundation for the resurgence of imperial authority, strengthening both internal governance and external military capability. The Komnenian dynasty, which continued under John II, Manuel I, and later successors, marked a period of consolidation that reinforced Byzantium's position as a dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans. The political context preceding the Komnenian Revival included years of civil unrest, external invasions, and weakened central authority. Before Alexios I's accession, the empire faced repeated challenges from the Normans in southern Italy, Pecheneg in the Balkans, Seljuk Turks in Anatolia, and internal revolts by regional governors. Byzantine emperors in the mid-11th century struggled to maintain control over the empire's provinces, and administrative fragmentation had undermined both fiscal efficiency and military readiness. Alexios I assumed power in this environment with a focus on restoring central authority, reforming the bureaucracy, and stabilizing the empire's finances. Military reform was central to the Komnenian Revival. Alexios I reorganized the imperial army, combining professional central units with the theme-based provincial forces inherited from earlier periods. The Komnenian military incorporated heavy cavalry, infantry, and specialized units, adapting tactics to meet both conventional engagements and asymmetric threats posed by nomadic raiders and Seljuk incursions. The use of fortified positions, mobile field armies, and coordinated logistics enabled the empire to defend critical territories while projecting power in contested regions. Recruitment relied on both native Byzantine soldiers and mercenary contingents, whose service was integrated into the larger strategic framework. The Seljuk Turks, following their victory at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 AD, posed a major challenge to the empire's eastern provinces. Large portions of Anatolia were lost to Seljuk control, significantly reducing the empire's agricultural and economic base. In response, Alexios I implemented defensive measures, including the construction and reinforcement of fortresses, the reorganization of local militias, and strategic diplomacy to limit further territorial losses. Diplomatic initiatives included treaties and alliances with neighboring powers, including the Normans, Pecheneg, and Western European states, to balance threats and secure frontier stability. These measures laid the groundwork for a gradual recovery of Byzantine control in key regions. Alexios I also leveraged the arrival of the First Crusade, 1096 to 1099 AD, to reinforce Byzantine military and political objectives. Crusader armies moving through Byzantine territory initially posed logistical and political challenges, as their presence could destabilize local governance and strain resources. Alexios negotiated agreements with Crusader leaders to ensure that their campaigns were coordinated with Byzantine strategic interests, including the return of captured territories to imperial control. Although tensions and disputes arose between Byzantine and Latin forces, the strategic use of Crusader armies contributed to the temporary stabilization of the empire's borders and facilitated the recapture of cities previously lost to Seljuk control. The Komnenian emperors also emphasized administrative and fiscal reform to support military operations and stabilize governance. Central bureaucracy was strengthened through the appointment of trusted officials to key posts, oversight of provincial administration, and standardization of tax collection. Revenue from land, urban property, trade, and customs duties was carefully monitored and allocated to maintain military readiness, fund public works, and support the court and clergy. Fiscal discipline and administrative oversight allowed the Komnenian state to mobilize resources effectively, sustain long-term campaigns, and maintain public order despite ongoing external threats. Economic recovery during this period was supported by the revival of trade networks and urban prosperity. Constantinople, Thessalonica, and other major cities regained prominence as commercial hubs, facilitating both internal exchange and long-distance trade. Byzantine merchants maintained connections with Italy, the Levant, the Black Sea, and the Balkans, exchanging commodities such as grain, wine, textiles, spices, and luxury goods. The gold hyperpyron, introduced under Alexios I, provided a stable currency for trade and taxation, reinforcing confidence in monetary transactions and supporting both domestic and international economic activity. Diplomacy played a critical role in consolidating Byzantine influence during the Komnenian revival. Alexios I and his successors engaged with Western Europe, neighboring states, and regional powers to secure alliances, mediate disputes, and extend Byzantine influence. Marriage alliances, treaties, and envoys were used to maintain political stability, facilitate military cooperation, and protect the empire's borders. Relations with the papacy and Western European powers were complex, particularly in the context of the Crusades, but Byzantine diplomacy successfully navigated these challenges to preserve autonomy, coordinate strategic objectives, and assert imperial authority in regional affairs. The Komnenian revival also witnessed a resurgence in cultural and intellectual life. Monastic communities, court scholars, and urban centers played a central role in preserving classical knowledge, producing historical chronicles, and compiling administrative manuals. Texts produced during this period, including military treatises, legal compilations, and theological works, reflected both continuity with classical Roman and earlier Byzantine traditions and adaptation to the social, political, and military realities of the 11th and 12th centuries. Literary and artistic production flourished under imperial patronage, reinforcing Byzantine cultural identity and strengthening the integration of intellectual and administrative life. Religious institutions remained closely integrated with state structures. Monasteries and churches were centers of education, social welfare, and cultural production. The Orthodox Church provided guidance on theological, ethical, and legal matters, and bishops participated in both local and imperial administration. Imperial patronage supported church construction, renovation, and artistic endeavors, reinforcing the relationship between ecclesiastical authority and imperial power. The Komnenian emperors used religious policy to maintain internal cohesion, legitimize imperial authority, and promote the continuity of Byzantine cultural and spiritual life. Basil II's predecessors in the Komnenian line established a precedent for disciplined military leadership, centralized administration, and strategic diplomacy, but the foundations laid during Alexios I's reign were critical for long-term stability. By combining fiscal reform, military innovation, and effective governance, the Komnenian emperors maintained control over a state recovering from the disruptions of the 10th and early 11th centuries. The careful management of internal resources, coordination with provincial authorities, and engagement with external powers enabled Byzantium to project influence beyond its immediate borders while preserving the integrity of the core empire. The Komnenian revival was also characterized by effective responses to external threats from the Normans, Pecheneg, Seljuks, and other regional powers. Defensive fortifications, strategic deployment of armies, and mobile campaigns allowed Byzantium to retain control over key territories in the Balkans, Asia Minor, and the Aegean Islands. Naval power remained an essential component of imperial strategy, securing maritime trade routes and protecting coastal cities from raids. The integration of land and naval forces, combined with disciplined administration and economic support, provided a framework for sustained military and political resilience. Social structures during this period were influenced by both economic recovery and administrative organization. Landowners, merchants, artisans, and soldiers were integrated into a hierarchical system that linked local governance with imperial authority. The theme system, adapted under Komnenian reforms, continued to provide both military readiness and agricultural output, ensuring the sustainability of provincial economies. Urban populations benefited from restored markets, trade opportunities, and civic infrastructure, while rural communities maintained production and contributed to military recruitment. The integration of social, economic, and military functions reinforced both stability and cohesion across the empire. Artistic and architectural production reflected the prosperity and strategic priorities of the Komnenian period. Churches and public buildings were constructed or renovated, incorporating mosaics, frescoes, and iconography that reinforced Orthodox Christian identity and imperial authority. Manuscript production, historical chronicles, and scholarly works documented the political, military, and cultural achievements of the dynasty, providing a record for administrative, educational, and religious purposes. Imperial patronage ensured that artistic and intellectual activity was closely aligned with the objectives of governance and statecraft. By the end of the Komnenian revival in 1180 AD, following the death of Manuel I Komnenos, the Eastern Roman Empire had regained stability, territorial integrity, and cultural vitality. Military reforms, economic recovery, administrative consolidation, and strategic diplomacy combined to sustain Byzantine power despite ongoing regional challenges. The achievements of the Komnenian dynasty established a framework for governance, defense, and cultural continuity that would influence the empire's subsequent interactions with Crusader states, Latin powers, and emerging regional threats in the Eastern Mediterranean. The period from 1095 to 1204 AD in the Eastern Roman Empire coincided with the broader era of the Crusades a series of military campaigns initiated by Western European powers aimed at reclaiming the Holy Land from Muslim control. For Byzantium, the Crusades represented both an opportunity and a challenge, as Latin Christian armies moved through imperial territory, sometimes cooperating with Byzantine forces, but frequently creating political tension, logistical challenges, and long-term strategic complications. This era exposed the vulnerabilities of Byzantine diplomacy and military strategy, while also highlighting the empire's ability to adapt to complex regional dynamics. The Age of the Crusades began in 1095 AD, when Pope Urban II called for a military expedition to liberate Jerusalem and the Holy Land from Muslim rule. This call mobilized knights, nobles, and peasants from Western Europe, initiating the First Crusade. From the Byzantine perspective, the arrival of these armies presented both potential advantages and risks. Emperor Alexios I Komnenos had previously negotiated military and political reforms to stabilize Byzantine control, particularly in Anatolia, which had been weakened by Seljuk incursions following the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. Alexios viewed the Crusaders as a means to reinforce Byzantine authority and recover lost territories, while ensuring that Latin forces would respect imperial sovereignty. Diplomatic negotiations between Alexios I and the leaders of the First Crusade were complex and multifaceted. Agreements stipulated that Crusader armies would swear oaths of loyalty to the Byzantine emperor, return captured territories to imperial control, and coordinate military campaigns in alignment with Byzantine strategic interests. These agreements reflected Alexios's long-term objective of consolidating authority in Anatolia and the Levant, reclaiming important cities, and stabilizing borders. However, enforcement proved challenging, as the diverse and independent-minded Crusader contingents often pursued their own objectives, creating tensions between Latin and Byzantine forces. The passage of Crusader armies through Byzantine territory required careful logistical planning. Supply lines, accommodation, and coordination with local authorities were critical to maintaining both security and order. Large armies, sometimes numbering in the tens of thousands, placed considerable strain on local resources, including food, water, and infrastructure. Byzantine administrators coordinated the movement of troops, secured roads, and provided strategic guidance, but conflicts occasionally arose between local populations and Crusader forces. These logistical challenges underscored the importance of administrative efficiency and the capacity of the empire to manage large-scale military movements through its territory. The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099 AD, ultimately succeeded in capturing Jerusalem and establishing several Crusader states, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, and the Principality of Antioch. From the Byzantine perspective, the outcomes were mixed. While some territories in Anatolia were recovered or stabilized through cooperation with Crusader forces, the establishment of Latin states in the Eastern Mediterranean introduced new geopolitical complexities. The presence of Western rulers with autonomous authority created potential threats to Byzantine influence, particularly in regions adjacent to imperial borders. Subsequent crusades, including the Second, 1147 to 1149 AD, and Third Crusades, 1189 to 1192 AD, continued to affect Byzantine territory and strategic calculations. These campaigns involved coordination, occasional conflict, and negotiation between Byzantine and Latin forces. Byzantine emperors, including John II Komnenos and Manuel I Komnenos, maintained diplomatic engagement with Crusader leaders to safeguard imperial interests, secure alliances, and manage the flow of armies through the empire. Byzantine strategy emphasized both the containment of potential threats and the leverage of Crusader armies to achieve territorial, political, and economic objectives. Relations between Byzantium and the Latin West were further complicated by cultural, theological, and political differences. Latin and Greek Christian traditions had diverged, with disputes over ecclesiastical authority, liturgical practices, and theological interpretation contributing to mutual suspicion. These differences were amplified by the presence of Latin armies operating independently within Byzantine territories. Tensions occasionally escalated into armed confrontations, disputes over territorial claims, and competition for influence over local populations. The complex interplay of religious and political dynamics required continuous diplomatic attention from Byzantine authorities. The economic implications of the Crusades were significant for the Eastern Roman Empire. The passage of Crusader armies through Byzantine territories stimulated demand for provisions, transportation, and accommodations, which provided short-term economic benefits to merchants and local producers. However, sustained military activity disrupted agriculture, trade, and taxation in affected regions. The empire invested resources in fortifying key cities, maintaining garrisons, and ensuring security along supply routes. These expenditures, while necessary for maintaining control, placed pressure on imperial finances and required careful fiscal management to balance military needs with broader administrative obligations. The Crusades also affected Byzantine military organization and strategy. The arrival of Western knights, heavily armored cavalry, introduced new tactical considerations, prompting adjustments in the deployment of Byzantine forces. Combined operations required coordination between Byzantine infantry, cavalry, and fortifications, emphasizing both defensive and offensive capabilities. The empire's experience in managing Crusader contingents informed subsequent military planning, including the reinforcement of borders, strategic use of fortifications, and preparation for campaigns in Anatolia, the Balkans, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Cultural interactions between Byzantine and Latin forces during the Crusades had lasting implications. While initial contact often involved tension and conflict, exchanges of military techniques, logistical methods, and diplomatic practices contributed to mutual understanding and adaptation. Byzantine scholars and administrators observed Western organizational methods, while Latin participants gained exposure to Byzantine governance, urban infrastructure, and cultural practices. These interactions shaped the development of both military and administrative approaches in the region, influencing the conduct of subsequent campaigns and governance policies. The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204 AD, represents the culmination of tensions between Byzantium and the Latin West during this period. Originally intended to reclaim Jerusalem, the crusade was diverted due to financial, political, and strategic factors, ultimately targeting Constantinople itself. The diversion was facilitated by Venetian commercial interests, internal Byzantine political disputes, and opportunistic alliances among Crusader leaders. The siege and eventual sack of Constantinople in 1204 resulted in significant disruption to Byzantine political, religious, and economic structures, effectively ending the uninterrupted continuity of the Eastern Roman Empire and leading to the establishment of the Latin Empire. In the 10 years between 1789 and 1799, France had dismantled the monarchy, redefined citizenship, and endured internal and external wars that reshaped Europe. Yet the ideals of liberty and equality that fueled the revolution had now been subsumed under a new political reality, one built on order, discipline, and control. The revolution did not end in restoration, as its enemies had hoped, nor in anarchy, as its critics feared. It ended in consolidation, the concentration of power under a single leader whose rule would redefine Europe for the next 15 years. On December 25, 1799, the new government was formally inaugurated in Paris. The consulate was born. Napoleon Bonaparte, now first consul of France, stood at the threshold of an empire that would soon bear his name. The decade between 1789 and 1799 reshaped not only France, but the entire foundation of modern politics, society, and governance. The French Revolution destroyed centuries of monarchy, feudal privilege, and clerical power, replacing them with ideas that would echo through every subsequent era: liberty, equality, and the sovereignty of the people. Its legacy is not simple triumph or failure, but a complex transformation that permanently altered how nations understood power and rights. Before 1789, France was structured under the Ancien regime, a rigid hierarchy rooted in birth, privilege, and divine right. The revolution dismantled this order piece by piece. The August decrees of 1789 abolished feudal dues, seigneurial rights, and tax exemptions that had shielded the nobility and clergy for generations. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen codified new principles of civil equality and individual liberty, declaring that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. By the early 1790s, the revolution had ended the monarchy, nationalized church property, and erased the privileges of the aristocracy. Nobles who once dominated the provinces were exiled or executed. Their estates became public property. The church, stripped of its temporal authority, was transformed into a civic institution under the Civil Constitution of the Clergy, 1790. These acts broke the fusion of church, crown, and nobility that had defined France for 1,000 years. In this sense, the revolution completed what earlier reform movements and Enlightenment thinkers had only theorized. The medieval world order was finished. France had transitioned, through chaos and blood, from a society of status to one of citizens. The revolution also created a new political language and institutional framework that became the model for modern nation-states. It introduced the concept of citizenship tied to civic duty and rights rather than birth. For the first time, sovereignty was explicitly grounded in the nation, not the monarch. Administrative centralization was another major legacy. To replace the old patchwork of provinces, feudal courts, and local privileges, the revolution reorganized France into 83 departments of roughly equal size, a structure that still exists today. This rationalized system of governance created a unified bureaucracy where local officials were accountable to the central government rather than hereditary lords. The metric system, introduced in 1795, symbolized this drive toward rationality and equality. It replaced inconsistent local measures with a universal standard based on reason and science. Even small reforms like this carried deep ideological weight, the belief that order could emerge from logic, not lineage. The revolution fundamentally redefined the relationship between the individual and the state. It introduced civil equality, secular authority, and the idea that laws should apply equally to all citizens. In doing so, it laid the groundwork for modern legal codes, later perfected under Napoleon as the Civil Code of 1804, which carried revolutionary principles into lasting institutional form. Revolutionary reforms also secularized education. Schools once dominated by the church were gradually replaced by state institutions emphasizing civic virtue and scientific reasoning. While uneven in practice, this shift marked the beginning of public education as a national duty, not a clerical privilege. The revolution's attack on hereditary privilege also expanded opportunity for the emerging bourgeoisie, the middle class of merchants, professionals, and officials. While equality did not extend to the working poor or to women, it established merit and property as the new foundations of social mobility. The revolution's relationship with religion was turbulent but historically decisive. By nationalizing church property, abolishing monastic orders, and subjecting clergy to state control, the revolution ended the Catholic Church's dominance in French political life. Religious toleration was extended to Protestants and Jews, groups that had long faced discrimination. However, radical phases of the revolution, especially the Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794, went further, attempting to replace Christianity altogether with the cult of reason and later the cult of the Supreme Being. These efforts ultimately failed, but they demonstrated how revolutionary ideology sought to substitute rationalism for faith. The post-terror settlement under the Directory, 1795 to 1799, and later Napoleon's Concordat with the Pope, 1801, did not restore the Church's old power. Instead, they formalized a new balance. Religion would be tolerated but subordinate to the state. This separation between civil and ecclesiastical authority became a defining feature of modern French governance. Economically, the revolution unleashed vast social change. The confiscation and sale of church and émigré lands redistributed property on an unprecedented scale. Millions of peasants acquired small farms, transforming the countryside into a nation of landowners. This shift reduced rural dependence on aristocratic landlords and helped stabilize French agriculture in the long term. The revolution's fiscal reforms, including the abolition of the taille, gabelle, and corvée, eliminated some of the most hated taxes and labor obligations of the Ancien regime. Although the Revolutionary Wars brought economic hardship and inflation, they also stimulated industry and modernized financial administration. The creation of uniform weights, measures, and internal markets promoted a more integrated national economy. In short, the revolution destroyed feudalism not just politically, but economically. Property became a right guaranteed by law rather than a privilege enforced by hierarchy. Beyond France, the revolution's ideas spread across Europe and the wider world. Revolutionary armies, under generals like Napoleon Bonaparte, carried the principles of equality before the law, secular governance, and national self-determination into territories from Italy to the Netherlands, from Switzerland to Poland. Monarchies everywhere viewed the revolution as a contagion threatening their legitimacy. Yet even its opponents could not ignore its ideological power. Concepts such as popular sovereignty, citizenship, and human rights began to reshape European and colonial societies alike. In Latin America, figures such as Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín drew inspiration from the revolution's ideals when pursuing independence from Spain. In Haiti, enslaved people rose against French colonial rule in 1791, launching the world's first successful slave revolt and establishing the first Black Republic, directly influenced by revolutionary principles of liberty and equality, even as France itself hesitated to apply them universally. The revolution's intellectual legacy extended further still. It defined the vocabulary of modern political debate: left and right, liberty and order, radical and conservative. It inspired liberalism, challenged monarchy, and gave birth to both democratic and nationalist movements across the 19th century. Yet the revolution's legacy is also marked by contradiction. The same movement that proclaimed universal rights unleashed terror and censorship. Its war for liberty led to conquest. Its calls for equality left women and slaves excluded from full citizenship. The Declaration of the Rights of Woman and of the Female Citizen, 1791, written by Olympe de Gouges, demanded gender equality but was rejected by the revolutionary leadership. De Gouges herself was executed during the Terror. The revolution's universalism was, in practice, limited, but its rhetoric opened the door for future generations to challenge that exclusion. Similarly, the abolition of slavery in 1794, a radical step for its time, was reversed under Napoleon in 1802, illustrating the fragility of revolutionary progress when confronted with political expediency. Despite these contradictions, the revolution's long-term impact cannot be dismissed. It permanently changed how people conceived of authority, legitimacy, and rights. No king in Europe could ever again rule unquestioned by divine right. Every government thereafter would have to reckon with the idea that power comes from the consent of the governed. Certain images and institutions from the Revolution became enduring symbols of French identity. The Empire of Nicaea, in particular, became a center for the restoration of imperial authority, retaining both the legal and ceremonial frameworks of Byzantine rule. Over the subsequent decades, these successor states engaged in diplomacy, military campaigns, and economic management aimed at recovering territories, restoring the capital, and reasserting Byzantine sovereignty. These efforts reflected the resilience of Byzantine institutions and the enduring influence of imperial traditions despite the rupture caused by the sack. The social impact of the sack was considerable. Urban populations suffered from violence, displacement, and the destruction of property. Local elites, artisans, and merchants were affected by the disruption of economic and administrative systems, leading to shifts in social hierarchy and local governance. Refugee populations relocated to successor states or neighboring regions, contributing to demographic changes and the spread of Byzantine cultural and administrative practices outside Constantinople. These population movements reinforced the role of successor states as centers of continuity for Byzantine governance, religion, and culture. Trade and economic recovery were slow, as Latin control of Constantinople altered existing networks and redirected resources to Western interests. The loss of financial assets, disruption of urban infrastructure, and fragmentation of territorial control reduced the empire's ability to generate revenue and sustain administrative and military functions. Successor states developed localized economic systems, relied on agriculture, and re-established trade links where possible, gradually rebuilding resources and maintaining the foundations of imperial administration. The integration of trade with Western European powers under Latin rule also created new commercial patterns that influenced regional economies. Cultural preservation and intellectual activity continued primarily in Nicaea and other successor states. Scholars, clergy, and officials maintained records, produced chronicles, and preserved manuscripts that documented both pre-1204 imperial achievements and the events of the sack itself. These activities ensured that Byzantine law, administration, and cultural traditions were transmitted to future generations, forming the basis for the eventual restoration of Constantinople and the re-establishment of the Eastern Roman Empire under the Palaiologos dynasty in 1261. The emphasis on preserving knowledge and institutional memory contributed to the continuity of Byzantine identity despite political fragmentation. The sack of 1204 also influenced subsequent Byzantine diplomatic strategy. Successor states developed alliances, negotiated with Western powers, and engaged in military campaigns aimed at reclaiming lost territories. The experience of Latin occupation informed Byzantine policies regarding fortifications, troop deployment, and the management of foreign powers in sensitive regions. Diplomatic, military, and administrative lessons learned during this period guided the eventual efforts to restore Constantinople and consolidate imperial authority in the mid-13th century. By the end of the Fourth Crusade, the Byzantine Empire had been transformed politically, economically, and socially. The displacement of the imperial court, establishment of the Latin Empire, and fragmentation into successor states created a new geopolitical reality in the Eastern Mediterranean. While the immediate consequences were catastrophic, the resilience of Byzantine governance, cultural continuity, and religious institutions allowed the Eastern Roman traditions to endure and provided the framework for eventual restoration. The sack of Constantinople in 1204 represents a critical episode in Byzantine history, illustrating both the vulnerability of the empire to external intervention and the enduring strength of its institutional and cultural legacy. The period from 1204 to 1261 AD in Byzantine history is defined by the empire in exile, a phase following the sack of Constantinople by the Fourth Crusade that resulted in the establishment of the Latin Empire. While Constantinople fell under Latin control, several Byzantine successor states emerged in Asia Minor, the Aegean, and the Balkans, maintaining continuity of imperial governance, orthodox religious authority, and administrative structures. Chief among these successor states were the Empire of Nicaea, the Despotate of Epirus, and the Empire of Trebizond, each serving as centers of political, military, and cultural preservation during the displacement of Byzantine authority from its historic capital. The Empire of Nicaea, established by Theodore I Lascaris, quickly became the principal center for Byzantine governance in exile. Situated in northwestern Asia Minor, Nicaea possessed strategic advantages, including defensible terrain, proximity to Constantinople, access to trade routes in the Sea of Marmara, and agricultural resources capable of sustaining both civilian populations and military forces. Theodore I Lascaris focused on consolidating territorial control, establishing administrative structures, and creating a stable political environment capable of supporting the continuity of Byzantine traditions. The state maintained a hierarchical bureaucracy modeled on Constantinopolitan administration, including the appointment of governors, judicial officials, military commanders, and fiscal officers to manage provinces and resources effectively. In addition to Nicaea, the Despotate of Epirus, located in western Greece and Albania, emerged under the leadership of Michael I Komnenos Doukas. Epirus served as a secondary Byzantine power base, preserving elements of imperial administration and orthodox religious structures. Its geographic position offered access to trade routes in the Ionian Sea and the Adriatic, facilitating economic resilience and diplomatic engagement with Western powers. While smaller than Nicaea, Epirus maintained military and administrative capabilities that enabled it to conduct campaigns, secure borders, and engage in regional diplomacy. The Empire of Trebizond, founded by Alexios I of the Komnenos dynasty, was established on the southeastern coast of the Black Sea. Trebizond leveraged its location for maritime trade, particularly with regions of the Caucasus, the Black Sea littoral, and the Near East. It became a center for commerce, administration, and cultural continuity, while maintaining Orthodox religious practices and Byzantine ceremonial traditions. Trebizond's strategic position allowed it to survive independently from both Latin and other Byzantine successor states, serving as a peripheral yet resilient extension of Byzantine heritage. The period of Byzantine exile required careful management of diplomatic relations. Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond engaged in strategic alliances, military coordination, and negotiations with surrounding powers, including the Latin Empire, the Seljuk Sultanate of Rome, the Bulgarian Empire, and various Western European states. Diplomacy focused on securing territorial integrity, recovering lost Byzantine lands, and facilitating the eventual restoration of Constantinople. Treaties, marriages, and military pacts were tools used to maintain influence, balance regional power dynamics, and prepare for the eventual reintegration of imperial authority. Military organization was a central aspect of Byzantine survival in exile. The Empire of Nicaea, in particular, developed a professional army composed of native Byzantine troops, local militias, and mercenary contingents. Soldiers were organized into units capable of both defensive operations and offensive campaigns aimed at reclaiming territory. Fortifications were reinforced in key locations, including Nicaea itself and other strategic towns in Asia Minor, to protect against Latin incursions, Seljuk attacks, and internal rebellions. Cavalry units, infantry, and specialized forces were integrated to respond to diverse threats, reflecting the continuation of Komnenian military principles adapted to the challenges of exile. Economic activity in the successor states was vital for sustaining military, administrative, and social functions. Nicaea's position allowed for agricultural production in fertile plains and control of trade routes connecting the interior of Anatolia with the Marmara coast. Markets in Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond facilitated both local and long-distance trade, including grain, textiles, wine, and luxury goods. The management of taxation, tariffs, and tolls provided revenue necessary to support armies, maintain fortifications, and administer justice. Byzantine currency, including the gold hyperpyron, continued to serve as a medium of exchange, preserving financial stability and supporting economic continuity. Religious institutions remained central to the Byzantine Empire in exile. The Orthodox Church preserved liturgical practices, theological scholarship, and ecclesiastical hierarchy despite displacement from Constantinople. Bishops and monastic leaders maintained authority in spiritual and administrative matters, ensuring the continuity of religious education, charitable functions, and the preservation of manuscripts and chronicles. The Patriarchate, initially displaced, eventually coordinated with Nicaea to maintain canonical authority, sustaining the legitimacy of imperial rule and reinforcing Orthodox Christian identity among the displaced Byzantine population. Cultural and intellectual life persisted in exile through the patronage of emperors, local elites, and monastic communities. Scholars produced historical chronicles, theological treatises, and administrative manuals, ensuring the transmission of knowledge from pre-1200 for Constantinople to successor states. Monastic communities functioned as centers of learning, manuscript preservation, and education, maintaining traditions in theology, literature, and law. Artistic production, including iconography, mosaics, and ecclesiastical architecture, continued in Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond, reinforcing the visual and ceremonial continuity of Byzantine cultural identity. The successor states coordinated military campaigns to reclaim territories and challenge Latin authority. Nicene emperors, particularly John III Doukas Vatatzes, pursued systematic efforts to expand influence in Asia Minor and the Aegean. Strategic sieges, border raids, and the consolidation of fortresses strengthened Byzantine control over contested areas and allowed the empire in exile to project power despite the loss of Constantinople. The effectiveness of these operations depended on logistical planning, resource management, and coordination between civil and military authorities, reflecting the enduring adaptability of Byzantine governance. Internal governance in exile emphasized continuity with Constantinopolitan administrative models. Officials managed provincial administration, taxation, justice, and public works. Civic councils, courts, and fiscal offices operated in accordance with imperial legal codes, including the Basilica and other Byzantine legal compilations. Local governance was integrated with central authority in Nicaea, providing a coherent administrative framework that supported both domestic stability and military operations. This system enabled the successor states to maintain legitimacy in the eyes of both the Byzantine population and external powers. Diplomatic relations with the Latin Empire and other regional powers were complex and shifting. Nicaea engaged in negotiations, treaties, and military alliances with neighboring states, including intermittent cooperation with Epirus and Trebizond. These interactions involved negotiations over territory, recognition of authority, and strategic coordination in response to threats from Western powers, the Seljuks, and emerging regional actors. Byzantine diplomacy relied on the use of envoys, marriage alliances, and carefully calibrated military actions to preserve autonomy and maintain long-term strategic objectives. Population movements shaped the social landscape of the empire in exile. Refugees from Constantinople, Anatolia, and the Aegean resettled in Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond, contributing to demographic shifts, labor distribution, and cultural integration. Urban populations adapted to the conditions of exile through commerce, craft production, and participation in administrative and military structures. Rural populations supported agricultural production, taxation, and military conscription, sustaining the economic and logistical foundation of the successor states. Social cohesion was reinforced through religious institutions, local governance, and shared imperial identity. By the mid-13th century, the Empire of Nicaea had emerged as the principal center of Byzantine restoration efforts. John III Doukas Vatatzes, r. 1222–1254, implemented policies aimed at strengthening the state, expanding territorial control, and preparing for the eventual recovery of Constantinople. Administrative reform, economic development, military consolidation, and diplomatic engagement reinforced Nicaea's capacity to assert imperial authority. These efforts culminated in the eventual recapture of Constantinople in 1261 under Michael VIII Palaiologos, marking the end of Byzantine exile and the restoration of the Eastern Roman Empire, albeit in a weakened and territorially constrained form. Throughout the period of 1204 to 1261 AD, the empire in exile demonstrated the resilience of Byzantine political, military, economic, and cultural institutions. Despite the loss of the historic capital, displaced emperors and officials maintained continuity of governance, preserved orthodox religious authority, and ensured the survival of administrative, legal, and intellectual traditions. The successor states acted as custodians of Byzantine heritage, sustaining the structures necessary for the eventual restoration of the empire. Their capacity to adapt to changing military, diplomatic, and economic conditions exemplified the enduring functionality and flexibility of Byzantine statecraft. The empire in exile also reinforced the connection between imperial authority and Orthodox Christianity. Religious legitimacy underpinned political authority, and coordination between emperors and church leaders ensured cohesion among displaced populations. Monastic networks provided education, manuscript preservation, and social services, contributing to both cultural continuity and the stabilization of local communities. The integration of spiritual and temporal authority maintained social cohesion, reinforced loyalty to imperial leadership, and strengthened the identity of the Byzantine state in exile. By 1261, the empire in exile had successfully preserved the core structures of Byzantine governance, military organization, and cultural identity. The administrative, military, and diplomatic strategies developed in Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond enabled the restoration of Constantinople and the continuity of imperial authority under the Palaiologos dynasty. The period of exile represents a critical phase in Byzantine history, demonstrating both the challenges posed by foreign conquest and the adaptive capacity of the Eastern Roman Empire to maintain its traditions, institutions, and identity despite displacement from its historic center. The period from 1261 to 1354 AD is defined by the Palaiologos restoration, during which the Byzantine Empire was re-established under the Palaiologos dynasty after the recapture of Constantinople from Latin occupation. The restoration was initiated by Michael VIII Palaiologos, who seized Constantinople in 1261, thereby reasserting Byzantine imperial authority and re-establishing the city as the political, economic, and religious center of the Eastern Roman Empire. While the restoration symbolized the continuity of Byzantine imperial traditions, the empire emerged territorially diminished, economically weakened, and politically vulnerable to both internal factionalism and external threats, particularly from the Ottomans, Balkan states, and Western European powers. Michael VIII Palaiologos, having consolidated power in the Empire of Nicaea, coordinated the recapture of Constantinople in July 1261. Utilizing a combination of naval maneuvering and strategic coordination with loyalist forces, Michael VIII re-entered the city virtually unopposed after the death of the Latin garrison commander Baldwin of Courtenay. The successful restoration relied on careful planning, intelligence gathering, and the support of both military and local populations who were discontent with Latin rule. Following the recapture, Michael VIII undertook immediate measures to consolidate authority, restore administrative functions, and reinstate the Orthodox Patriarchate, ensuring religious and political legitimacy for the restored Byzantine state. The Palaiologan administration faced significant challenges. Constantinople had suffered from nearly 6 decades of Latin occupation, which disrupted governance, commerce, and infrastructure. Many public buildings, fortifications, and civic institutions required repair or reconstruction. Michael VIII prioritized the restoration of defensive structures, including the Theodosian walls, to safeguard the capital against potential Latin reconquest and emerging regional threats. Administrative offices were reinstated, staffed by officials from Nicaea and loyal Byzantine bureaucrats, ensuring continuity of governance and law. The re-establishment of fiscal institutions was critical, as the empire required stable revenue streams to support military, civil, and religious functions. Economic recovery was a central focus of the Palaiologos restoration. Constantinople resumed its role as a key hub of trade in the eastern Mediterranean, linking Anatolia, the Balkans, and the Aegean with Western European markets. Efforts were made to revive maritime commerce, encourage agricultural production in surrounding provinces, and re-establish taxation systems to fund the administration and military. However, the empire's economic capacity was constrained by the loss of territories, limited agricultural output, and competition from emerging powers, including the Italian maritime republics of Venice and Genoa. Trade concessions to these maritime powers, negotiated to secure naval assistance and alliances, simultaneously provided resources and imposed long-term economic limitations on Byzantine autonomy. The Palaiologan military faced persistent challenges. While Michael VIII successfully restored the empire's capital, the territories under direct Byzantine control were limited, including parts of Thrace, the Morea, Peloponnese, and portions of western Anatolia. The military relied on a combination of native Byzantine troops, mercenaries, and local militias to defend borders, secure trade routes, and maintain internal stability. Fortifications were reinforced not only in Constantinople but also in strategic provincial centers to deter invasions from Latin states, Bulgarians, Serbs, and emerging Ottoman forces. The empire's military strategy focused on defensive consolidation, limited offensive operations, and strategic diplomacy to compensate for territorial constraints and declining manpower. Internal political dynamics shaped the Restoration period. Michael VIII faced opposition from both Western-oriented factions within the aristocracy and local elites seeking to assert regional authority. Efforts to centralize power included strategic appointments, confiscation of rebellious estates, and the incorporation of loyalists into administrative and military positions. Court politics remained complex, influenced by familial rivalries, succession disputes, and the integration of former Nicaean officials into Constantinopolitan governance. These internal dynamics affected decision-making, resource allocation, and military campaigns, requiring careful balance between consolidation of authority and accommodation of competing interests within the elite. Religion played a crucial role in legitimizing the Palaiologos dynasty. The Orthodox Church was reinstated as the state religion, and the Patriarch of Constantinople resumed authority over ecclesiastical matters. Michael VIII maintained close coordination with church leaders, supporting monastic institutions, overseeing the restoration of churches, and regulating theological education. Religious legitimacy was instrumental in reinforcing imperial authority, fostering social cohesion, and providing ideological justification for political and military initiatives. The alignment of church and state functions facilitated governance and helped stabilize both the capital and provincial regions during the post-Restoration period. Cultural revival characterized aspects of the Palaiologos restoration. Byzantine artistic, architectural, and intellectual traditions were promoted by imperial patronage. Restoration of churches and public buildings incorporated mosaics, frescoes, and iconography consistent with pre-1200 for Byzantine artistic standards. Scholarship flourished in Constantinople and provincial centers, including theological studies, historiography, and the preservation of classical texts. Monastic communities served as centers of education, manuscript production, and religious life, reinforcing cultural continuity despite the political and economic challenges facing the empire. Diplomatic engagement was central to the Palaiologos restoration. Michael VIII sought to manage relations with Western European powers, Latin states in Greece, and regional rivals such as the Bulgarians and Serbs. Negotiations with Venice and Genoa, including trade agreements and naval alliances, were critical for securing military and economic support. Diplomatic strategies emphasized both containment of potential threats and the cultivation of alliances that could reinforce Byzantine sovereignty in contested regions. The effectiveness of diplomacy depended on balancing concessions with the assertion of imperial authority, navigating the complex interplay of regional and international interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. The restored empire faced continued threats from the Latin states established in Greece and the Aegean. The Duchy of Athens, the Principality of Achaia, and other Latin-controlled territories posed military and economic challenges, limiting the empire's capacity for territorial expansion. Michael VIII and his successors engaged in military campaigns to recover key territories, relying on fortified positions, strategic alliances, and selective offensives. The empire's capacity to project power was constrained by limited resources, ongoing external threats, and internal factionalism, necessitating a focus on defensive consolidation and selective territorial recovery rather than broad expansion. Population dynamics in the post-Restoration period reflected both continuity and adaptation. Refugees, displaced populations, and returning elites from Nicaea and other regions resettled in Constantinople and surrounding provinces. Urban populations gradually recovered, supporting trade, crafts, and administrative functions. Rural populations resumed agricultural production, supplying food and resources for both civilian and military purposes. Social cohesion was reinforced through religious institutions, imperial authority, and the integration of local governance with centralized administrative structures. These demographic patterns contributed to the stability and functioning of the restored empire despite ongoing challenges. The Palaiologos dynasty also faced challenges in managing succession and maintaining dynastic continuity. Michael VIII arranged marriages and appointed heirs to secure legitimacy and stabilize the imperial line. His policies sought to integrate various noble factions, prevent rival claims, and maintain loyalty among military and administrative elites. Despite these measures, succession disputes and internal rivalries periodically threatened political stability, influencing decision-making and affecting the broader trajectory of the empire during the Restoration period. Economic policy emphasized revenue generation, trade management, and fiscal stabilization. Imperial taxation systems were reinforced, trade tariffs were administered to support state functions, and agricultural production was monitored to ensure food security. Concessions to Italian maritime powers allowed for the integration of Venetian and Genoese commercial networks, providing access to naval support and trade resources while imposing limitations on autonomous Byzantine control of commerce. The balance between economic recovery, military expenditure, and diplomatic necessity defined fiscal strategy throughout the Palaiologos restoration. By the mid-14th century, the Byzantine Empire under the Palaiologos dynasty had regained its capital and restored elements of imperial authority, but remained territorially constrained and politically vulnerable. Threats from the rising Ottoman Principality in Anatolia, internal civil conflicts, and competing regional powers required constant attention to military readiness, fortification maintenance, and diplomatic negotiation. The period illustrates the resilience of Byzantine institutions in maintaining continuity of governance, law, religion, and culture despite significant structural challenges and the enduring impact of the Latin occupation of Constantinople. The Palaiologos restoration period highlights the adaptive capacity of the Byzantine state. Administrative structures, military organization, religious authority, economic management, and cultural patronage all contributed to maintaining imperial continuity in a challenging geopolitical environment. The restored empire functioned as a cohesive entity, capable of defending its territory, maintaining central authority, and preserving Byzantine identity, even as it faced ongoing pressures from external adversaries and internal political dynamics. From 1261 to 1354 AD in Byzantine history, following the Palaiologos restoration, is characterized by the empire's ongoing interactions with Western Europe. These interactions involve diplomacy, trade, military negotiation, and religious negotiation, reflecting the Byzantine Empire's strategic efforts to secure alliances, manage potential threats, and regain influence after the Latin occupation. The restored empire under the Palaiologos dynasty faced significant challenges in engaging with Western powers, including Italy's maritime republics, the papacy, and Latin states in Greece, as well as the rising influence of new regional powers such as the Ottomans and Balkan principalities. Byzantium's diplomacy with the West sought both immediate security and long-term political leverage, though it was often complicated by religious schisms, mistrust, and competing interests. Following the restoration of Constantinople in 1261 by Michael VIII Palaiologos, the Byzantine Empire's position in the Eastern Mediterranean required careful management of relations with Western European states. Michael VIII recognized the threat posed by the Latin powers, particularly Venice and Genoa, whose commercial networks and naval capabilities could influence regional power dynamics. In response, Byzantium engaged in negotiations to balance concessions with strategic advantage. Venice, which had played a central role in the Fourth Crusade, remained a key actor in maritime commerce and political influence, while Genoa offered an alternative alliance that could counterbalance Venetian power. The Byzantine emperors leveraged these rivalries to secure favorable trade agreements, limited military assistance, and political recognition. The papacy played a central role in Western engagement with Byzantium. Relations were complicated by the existing schism between the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, a division that had deepened during the events of the Fourth Crusade. Michael VIII pursued cautious negotiation with the papacy, including the promise of limited ecclesiastical union in exchange for diplomatic recognition and protection against Western aggression. These efforts were often met with resistance from Orthodox clergy and local populations, who viewed union with the Latin Church as a threat to traditional Byzantine religious authority. Despite these challenges, attempts at negotiation provided a framework for temporary political alliances and influenced the empire's strategy for managing Western pressure. Trade and economic interactions with Western Europe were a critical aspect of Byzantium's engagement. Italian maritime republics such as Venice and Genoa controlled significant portions of Mediterranean trade, including routes to the Black Sea, the Aegean, and Anatolia. Byzantine emperors granted trade privileges, concessions, and access to ports in exchange for naval support, financial loans, and political recognition. These agreements allowed Byzantium to restore parts of its economic infrastructure, maintain urban markets, and sustain administrative and military expenditures. However, reliance on Italian maritime powers also introduced constraints, as foreign merchants gained considerable influence over local commerce, often limiting the empire's autonomy in regulating trade and collecting revenue. Military alliances with Western powers were pursued to supplement the Byzantine army, which remained limited in size and resources. Byzantine diplomacy sought mercenary support, naval assistance, and joint military operations to defend territories and respond to threats from Latin states, Bulgarians, Serbs, and emerging Ottoman forces in Anatolia. These alliances were sometimes temporary and conditional, requiring concessions in trade, recognition of authority, or political accommodation. Coordination with Western forces demanded careful planning to integrate foreign contingents with Byzantine military organization and to align strategic objectives with imperial priorities. Relations with the Latin states in Greece remained a significant concern. Following the Fourth Crusade, the Duchy of Athens, the Principality of Achaia, and other Latin territories maintained control over portions of the Peloponnese and central Greece. Byzantine emperors pursued a combination of diplomatic negotiation and military operations to challenge Latin authority and reclaim territory. These efforts included sieges, border raids, and the strategic use of fortifications. The limited resources and fragmented nature of the restored empire necessitated selective campaigns rather than full-scale offensives, reflecting the challenges of balancing internal administration, military readiness, and external diplomacy. The interaction with Western Europe also involved participation in broader geopolitical developments, including the Crusades and regional conflicts. Byzantine diplomacy required careful observation of Western military movements, political ambitions, and alliances. The empire sought to manage potential incursions by Latin powers while preserving independence and minimizing economic disruption. Coordination with Western allies was complicated by conflicting priorities, competing claims, and the enduring mistrust created by the events of 1204. Byzantine rulers emphasized negotiation, strategic accommodation, and selective cooperation as mechanisms to manage these challenges effectively. Religious negotiations remained a central factor in Byzantine-Western relations. Efforts to achieve ecclesiastical union with the Roman Church were pursued as a means of securing political recognition and support, particularly against Latin territorial ambitions. The Council of Lyons in 1274 formalized a temporary union between the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, intended to provide Western support for Michael VIII against threats from Charles of Anjou and other Latin powers. The union faced internal resistance, however, as Orthodox clergy, monastic communities, and portions of the population rejected papal authority and viewed concessions as a compromise of Byzantine religious integrity. These tensions influenced the broader effectiveness of diplomatic and military agreements with the West. The Byzantine approach to Western engagement required balancing immediate political needs with long-term strategic considerations. Diplomacy with Venice, Genoa, and other Italian states involved negotiation over trade access, maritime security, and recognition of imperial authority. Byzantine rulers also sought to exploit rivalries among Western powers to maximize strategic advantage while minimizing concessions. Military coordination, economic agreements, and religious negotiation were intertwined in a complex web of policy aimed at maintaining territorial integrity, economic stability, and imperial prestige. Economic pressures influenced Byzantine engagement with the West. Concessions to Italian merchants were necessary to secure naval and financial support, but they limited the empire's control over commerce, trade revenue, and maritime influence. Markets in Constantinople and other urban centers recovered partially through access to Italian trade networks, while local production of agricultural and manufactured goods sustained internal economic needs. The integration of Western commercial interests into Byzantine economic life reflected both necessity and constraint, shaping fiscal and administrative policy throughout the period. Military strategy during this period reflected the constraints of a restored but territorially reduced empire. Byzantine forces were deployed to defend borders, secure strategic passes, and maintain control over key maritime and inland routes. Alliances with Western powers were leveraged to reinforce these defensive operations, while fortifications were reinforced in Constantinople and provincial centers. The empire's capacity for offensive campaigns was limited, with strategic priorities focused on defending core territories, maintaining urban security, and preventing encroachment by neighboring powers. The influence of Western European powers also extended to culture, technology, and administration. Italian merchants, diplomats, and mercenaries brought practices that affected Byzantine urban administration, trade practices, and military logistics. While the empire maintained its legal, religious, and cultural traditions, selective adaptation of Western techniques in naval warfare, fortification, and commercial management reflected pragmatic engagement with evolving geopolitical realities. This interaction contributed to a degree of technological and administrative exchange that influenced the Byzantine state during the Palaiologan period. Byzantium's relationship with the West was further complicated by rising regional powers. The Bulgarian and Serbian kingdoms, as well as emerging Ottoman principalities in Anatolia, competed for territory and influence, often exploiting the empire's preoccupation with Western diplomacy and trade. Byzantine emperors engaged in simultaneous negotiation and military positioning to mitigate these threats, attempting to maintain stability in the Balkans and Anatolia while managing Western relations. The balancing of multiple external pressures required careful resource allocation, strategic foresight, and coordination between the administrative, military, and diplomatic branches of the state. Socially, engagement with Western Europe influenced urban populations, trade guilds, and local elites. Italian merchants and craftsmen settled in key cities, contributing to economic activity, artisan production, and commercial networks. Local elites were integrated into diplomatic negotiations and occasionally involved in military collaboration. Religious and cultural institutions mediated interactions between Western settlers and Byzantine populations, preserving orthodox practices while facilitating practical accommodation with Latin communities engaged in trade and administration. By the mid-14th century, Byzantium's position relative to the West reflected both opportunity and limitation. The restored empire retained control over Constantinople and core territories in Thrace, the Morea, and parts of Anatolia, yet remained vulnerable to external pressure and economic dependency on Western maritime powers. Diplomatic, economic, and military strategies were employed to maintain sovereignty, preserve trade access, and mitigate Latin influence, highlighting the complexities of Byzantine-Western relations in the post-Palaiologos Restoration period. Throughout 1261 to 1354, Byzantine engagement with the West was characterized by a pragmatic combination of diplomacy, economic negotiation, and limited military collaboration. The empire sought to protect its territorial integrity, secure economic resources, and reinforce imperial legitimacy while managing competing interests among Western powers. The period illustrates the challenges of maintaining sovereignty, navigating complex international relations, and balancing religious, economic, and military considerations in a post-Latin conquest Eastern Mediterranean. Byzantium's interaction with Western Europe during this period demonstrates the adaptive capacity of the empire to respond to geopolitical constraints. Through diplomacy, trade negotiation, military coordination, and ecclesiastical engagement, the empire managed external pressures while preserving continuity of governance, religious authority, and cultural identity. The strategies employed reflected the enduring priorities of Byzantine statecraft, maintaining political legitimacy, defending core territories, and sustaining economic and social stability in a complex and contested international environment. The period from 1354 to 1453 AD in Byzantine history is defined by the empire's steady territorial contraction, internal instability, and growing external pressures, primarily from the rising Ottoman Empire. Following the Palaiologan restoration, the Byzantine state retained Constantinople as its capital and controlled limited territories in Thrace, the Morea, parts of the Aegean, and isolated regions of western Anatolia. Despite efforts to maintain sovereignty and continuity of administration, the empire faced systemic challenges in defense, governance, and economic management that gradually reduced its capacity to exert influence both regionally and internationally. By the mid-14th century, the Byzantine Empire's political and military resources were strained. Territorial holdings had become fragmented, and key provinces were increasingly vulnerable to external attack and internal dissent. The Balkan region was contested by emerging states, including the Serbian Empire under Stefan Dusan and successor principalities following its fragmentation. In Anatolia, Turkish principalities, collectively referred to as the nascent Ottoman state, expanded into Byzantine territories, capturing cities, fortresses, and strategic passes. The empire's capacity to resist these incursions relied on a combination of fortified urban centers, limited standing forces, and diplomatic negotiation, but the disparity in military strength increasingly favored its adversaries. Economic pressures exacerbated the empire's vulnerability. Constantinople, though a vital center of trade, faced competition from Italian maritime republics such as Venice and Genoa, which maintained dominance over Mediterranean commerce. Byzantine trade privileges were negotiated with these powers to secure naval support or alliances, yet these concessions often limited autonomous economic control and reduced revenue from commerce. Agricultural production in the remaining provinces was insufficient to sustain both military and civilian populations fully, leading to fiscal strain. Taxation, tolls, and toll collection in provincial cities provided some revenue, but chronic shortages and depopulation in affected regions restricted economic recovery. The empire's military organization adapted to these constraints. Byzantine forces were increasingly reliant on mercenary contingents, limited native troops, and local militias. Fortifications in Constantinople, including the Theodosian walls, were maintained and reinforced to withstand siege warfare. Provincial strongholds were garrisoned selectively, with priority given to critical cities, passes, and maritime positions. Cavalry, infantry, and specialized units were deployed strategically to compensate for limited manpower, while attempts to recruit allied forces or coordinate campaigns with neighboring Christian states were intermittent and often unreliable. Despite these measures, the empire's military capacity was insufficient to repel sustained Ottoman expansion or coordinated attacks from other regional powers. Internal political dynamics were characterized by civil strife, succession disputes, and factional rivalry. The Palaiologos dynasty faced challenges in consolidating authority over provincial governors, military commanders, and urban elites, whose local interests often conflicted with central directives. Emperors sought to manage these tensions through appointments, marriages, and political alliances, but frequent disputes disrupted administration and undermined centralized governance. Civil wars, including conflicts among claimants to the throne, diverted resources from external defense and weakened imperial authority, further contributing to the empire's decline in territorial control and military influence. Religious institutions played a dual role in sustaining Byzantine identity and complicating governance. The Orthodox Church maintained its authority over spiritual and educational matters, preserving liturgical practices, monastic networks, and theological scholarship. Monasteries functioned as centers of literacy, manuscript preservation, and local governance, particularly in rural regions. However, the Church also possessed significant political influence, occasionally challenging imperial decisions or aligning with local elites, adding complexity to central administration. Coordination between church and state was essential for maintaining social cohesion, legitimacy, and ideological continuity amid the empire's diminishing capacity for centralized control. Byzantine defensive strategies combined the use of fortifications, counter-siege operations, and naval measures. The chain across the Golden Horn prevented the Ottoman fleet from entering the harbor directly, requiring Mem II to transport ships overland, demonstrating both Ottoman ingenuity and Byzantine determination to defend the city. The defenders repaired breaches, repelled assaults, and conducted sorties to disrupt Ottoman siege operations. Despite these efforts, the disparity in numbers, technology, and resources increasingly favored the besiegers. Constant coordination among defensive sectors, maintenance of morale, and integration of foreign mercenaries were critical to sustaining resistance. Diplomatic efforts accompanied military preparations. Constantine XI sought assistance from Western Europe, sending envoys to Pope Nicholas V and Italian maritime republics. Appeals emphasized the religious significance of Constantinople, the threat of Ottoman expansion to Christendom, and requests for military aid, including troops, naval support, and artillery. Limited contingents arrived, notably from Genoa and Venice, but logistical difficulties, political rivalries, and Western preoccupations restricted the scale of assistance. As a result, Byzantium faced the siege primarily with its own diminished forces and local allies. The final assault on Constantinople was executed on May 29, 1453, after a sustained bombardment weakened the city's walls. Ottoman forces launched coordinated attacks on multiple fronts, utilizing artillery to target breaches and infantry to exploit weakened sections. The defenders mounted a determined resistance, but Ottoman forces eventually penetrated the walls near the gate of St. Romanus. Urban fighting ensued, with Byzantine troops, militia, and mercenaries defending streets, gates, and key structures. Despite localized successes, the overwhelming numerical superiority and sustained pressure of the Ottoman army led to the collapse of organized resistance. Emperor Constantine XI engaged directly in the defense of the city, rallying troops and coordinating counterattacks. Accounts describe him removing imperial regalia to fight alongside soldiers, symbolizing personal leadership and commitment to the city's defense. Ultimately, Constantine XI was killed in combat during the final breach, marking the definitive end of the Byzantine imperial line. His death, combined with the fall of Constantinople, extinguished the Eastern Roman Empire's continuity of authority dating back to 285 AD under Diocletian's division of the Roman Empire. The fall of Constantinople had immediate military, political, and demographic consequences. The Ottoman Empire consolidated control over Thrace, the Bosporus, and access to the Aegean Sea, establishing Constantinople as its capital and transforming it into a center of Ottoman administration, trade, and military power. Byzantine institutions, including administration, law, and the Orthodox Church, were subordinated to Ottoman authority, although local religious and legal autonomy was partially maintained for Christian populations under Ottoman millet systems. The capture of Constantinople also marked a critical shift in regional power, signaling the end of Byzantine influence in southeastern Europe and the eastern Mediterranean. Economic repercussions were significant. Constantinople had been a major center of trade connecting Europe and Asia, facilitating commerce in grain, silk, spices, and manufactured goods. Ottoman control redirected trade routes, integrated markets into the expanding Ottoman economy, and shifted the balance of maritime commerce in the eastern Mediterranean. Italian maritime republics, previously active in Constantinople, adapted by negotiating trade agreements with the Ottoman administration, maintaining commercial presence while recognizing the new political realities. The fall of the city altered economic networks, redistributing trade, wealth, and influence across the region. The Orthodox Church, central to Byzantine identity, faced reorganization under Ottoman rule. The Patriarch of Constantinople was re-established under Ottoman supervision, with authority to oversee religious affairs, education, and ecclesiastical governance for Orthodox Christian communities within the empire. Monastic networks continued to operate, preserving religious, educational, and cultural traditions despite the loss of political autonomy. The survival of Orthodox institutions contributed to the continuity of Byzantine religious and cultural influence, extending into successor states and Orthodox communities throughout the Balkans. The fall of Constantinople also catalyzed demographic and migratory movements. Byzantine elites, scholars, and artisans fled to Western Europe, particularly Italy, carrying classical manuscripts, artistic traditions, and technical knowledge. These migrations contributed to the Italian Renaissance by transferring knowledge of ancient Greek and Roman texts, philosophical ideas, and scientific techniques. The movement of populations influenced cultural exchange, education, and intellectual development in Western Europe, representing a lasting legacy of Byzantine civilization beyond its political demise. Military technology and strategy were influenced by the siege. The effective use of large-scale artillery demonstrated the decline of traditional medieval fortifications and signaled the increasing importance of gunpowder weapons in siege warfare. Ottoman tactical innovations, including coordinated multi-front assaults, overland transport of ships, and systematic application of artillery, became models for subsequent military campaigns. Byzantine experience in urban defense, logistical management, and coordination of limited forces provided case studies in late medieval military history. Although the city's fall underscored the limitations imposed by technological disparity and strategic isolation, the psychological and symbolic impact of Constantinople's fall was profound. As the historic capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, the city represented continuity of Roman imperial authority, Christian orthodoxy, and classical heritage. Its capture by the Ottomans symbolized the end of an era, while simultaneously marking the rise of a new regional power with both military and economic dominance. Contemporary chroniclers recorded the fall as a transformative event, influencing European perceptions of political stability, religious conflict, and the shifting balance of power between East and West. By 1453, the Ottoman administration began consolidating governance, integrating Constantinople into the empire's bureaucratic, fiscal, and military structures. Public buildings, markets, fortifications, and religious institutions were repurposed or restored to meet Ottoman administrative needs. The city became a strategic hub connecting Europe and Asia, enabling the Ottomans to project power, control trade routes, and manage territorial expansion in the Balkans and Anatolia. The transformation of Constantinople reflected the shift from a Byzantine-centered imperial system to an Ottoman-centered imperial system, with continuity of urban function but a profound reorganization of political authority. The fall of Constantinople closed the history of the Eastern Roman Empire, spanning from Diocletian's administrative division in 285 AD through the Palaiologan restoration and ending with the conquest by Mem II. Byzantine culture, law, religious institutions, and intellectual traditions persisted through successor states, including the Despotate of the Morea, the Empire of Trebizond, and Orthodox communities in the Balkans. The legacy of Byzantine governance, military organization, artistic production, and scholarship continued to influence European and Near Eastern societies long after the political entity ceased to exist.